What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Mushoku Tensei as a Beast Monarch? Part 2. If you enjoy this type of content, please super smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of a Beast Monarch without further ado. Rigger stood before a broad empty space in the clearing, surrounded by shattered stones and patches of earth scattered with small craters. This clearing served as his testing ground, a place where he could experiment freely without worrying about damaging the village or endangering its residents. Yet, even here, the dangers of his practices were ever present. He was about to test a new concept he'd been developing: vacuum magic. If I can control the pressure and create a stable area, he murmured, focusing mana into his hands. The concept involved creating a space devoid of air, generating a vacuum field. With this, he hoped to recreate techniques similar to Danzo Shimura's vacuum abilities and amplify his fire explosions. He channeled mana in a specific pattern, attempting to mold the magic with precision, or at least trying to. The required level of control was far beyond what he anticipated. The result was catastrophic. The unstable magic compressed into a singularity before violently exploding. Rigger felt the imminent danger of death, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. His body reacted instinctively, using Flash Step to dart out of the danger zone. A shockwave erupted in one direction, while a sharp blade-like rift of compressed air shot in the opposite direction, striking one of the millennia-old trees in the distance. The colossal trunk was sliced cleanly as if it were paper, and the massive tree toppled with a thunderous crash that echoed through the forest. Rigger staggered back, his heart pounding. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he stared at the devastation he'd caused. That was too close. He exhaled deeply, trying to steady his nerves. One mistake, and I could have been killed. He had severely underestimated the level of control required to wield vacuum magic. The precision needed was likely at a molecular level. Determined to avoid such near-death experiences, he resolved to significantly improve his control before attempting any similarly dangerous magic again. Experimentation shouldn't feel like gambling with his life. Returning to his scattered notes, he began mentally cataloging the possibilities and limitations of the magical elements he mastered. He recalled the day he tried channeling the maximum amount of mana into an explosion spell. The flames, normally orange, shifted to yellow and then to a fierce blue, indicating an exponentially higher temperature and destructive potential. The intense heat was still fresh in his memory. If I gain enough control over fire, could I do something like Yamamoto's Bankai? The idea fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. Flames of that magnitude would be devastating, to his enemies and himself, if mismanaged. Looking down at the ground, he remembered the Saint-level Earth Magic Colossus Fortress. After mastering its structure, he could rapidly create platforms and reshape them as needed. It revolutionized his battlefield mobility, enabling him to leap, dodge, and craft impromptu structures with ease. Yet, he aspired for something greater: control at a molecular level. Water magic, however, left him unsatisfied. While useful for creating ice, it didn't seem as versatile. Maybe if I focus on pressurizing water. He pondered whether he was overlooking something or if the element's limitations were inherent. He hoped that exploring the saint-level water magic his master Verdia mentioned, one that involved rainstorms and lightning, might provide inspiration. Barrier magic was another challenge. While some barriers, like elemental magic barrier and intermediate physical barrier, were practical, most had highly specific purposes, such as sealing or blocking particular forces. Creating a fast, versatile barrier was still beyond his reach. Unfortunately, his lack of talent in the field made casting barrier spells without incantations difficult, though he'd managed the magic barrier through sheer effort. Healing magic, on the other hand, was an area of rapid progress. His current goal was to heal without direct contact, aiming for something akin to continuous regeneration. His initial results were promising. Having reached an advanced level in detoxification magic, he decided to set it aside temporarily to focus on more pressing pursuits. Rigger sighed as his thoughts drifted to his curiosity about summoning and teleportation magic. If only there was someone to teach me. Unfortunately, according to Verdia, these magics seemed to be lost to time. It was something he'd have to uncover on his own if he chose to pursue them. Failing that, He resolved to visit the flying fortress of the armored Dragon King someday, home to the greatest summoner. Among the magics he wanted to create, lightning magic was a top priority. Inspired by the storms conjured through saint-level water magic, he planned to use it as a foundation. Additionally, he aimed to refine howling magic. If he could control its intensity and apply it on a larger scale, it might resemble the Conqueror's Haki from One Piece, a technique that intimidated and subdued foes in his vicinity. The idea was clear: turn experiments into practical tools. As he ran through the forest back to the village, Rigger contemplated the possibilities and limitations he faced. His magic was progressing well, both traditional and experimental. But his advancement in his sword techniques worried him. Still, today's accident with vacuum magic served as a stark reminder of how far he had to go. When Rigger arrived at the village, he saw Killian training a group of children and adults in the training field, including Linnea and Persina. Approaching, he called out, "Killian, come with me." Though only 7 years old, Killian displayed unwavering dedication to the Iron Legion. His efforts to train everyone while managing administrative tasks made Rigger consider him his right-hand man, a role Killian seemed thrilled to fulfill. Killian quickly followed, trailing Rigger to a more secluded area. There, he began his report. "Taze is nearly at the advanced level. He'll be ready to follow you when you leave." Rigger nodded, satisfied. He was considering establishing an external branch of the Iron Legion, and Taze, who was both talented and mature, seemed like the ideal leader. At almost 11 years old, Taze showed promise, which was why Rigger had asked Killian to monitor his progress closely. Killian continued, detailing the children's and adults' progress. Lysena excelled in water magic, particularly ice, but struggled in close combat. Taze, on the other hand, showed a natural affinity for the North God style practiced by the tribe. However, starting later than others meant his magic proficiency only reached the intermediate level, with his mana reserves being modest. Among the adults, many were learning magic, although they could not use incantation-free casting. But most joined for the unique physical exercises Rigger introduced, courtesy of his grappling expertise from his previous life. Rigger listened intently, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of each member. "Have you found any solutions for the swords?" he asked after the report. "No. The tribe doesn't have the best blacksmiths, and we certainly don't have a sword capable of withstanding your magical enhancements," Killian replied, disheartened. Rigger glanced at the sword on his waist. "All right. Let me know if there's any news." He then dismissed Killian. By late afternoon, Rigger reached Fendrel's home. He heard laughter and animated voices as he approached, leaping to the treetop house. Fendrel and Garu were there, seated with full mugs, and to his surprise, his father Huntar was also present. It was rare to see him in moments of relaxation, but here he seemed at ease, chatting casually with the others. "Ah, Rigger!" Fendrel exclaimed as he saw Rigger approaching. "The prodigy of the Doldia tribe decides to bless us with his presence." "Oh? Did you muster some courage after drinking, Fendrel?" Rigger replied with a playful smile. He knew it was a joke, but the compliment still made him slightly uncomfortable. "Ha ha, have you forgotten you can no longer beat him, Fendrel?" Garu said as he finished the rest of his mug. "Come, sit down." Huntar inclined his head in acknowledgement, and Rigger felt the familiar warmth of being among trusted people. He settled onto one of the benches and accepted a mug Fendrel handed him. "So what brings you here?" Huntar asked, looking directly at Rigger. "It's not every day you join us for moments like these." Rigger hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm struggling," he admitted. "I want to reach the saint level in the sword god style, but I feel like I've hit a wall. The more I train, the more I realize how far I am from it." Huntar smiled, a mix of pride and understanding in his expression. "You're far from it because you're aiming for something great, Rigger. No one reaches the saint level without effort. Even the greatest masters faced challenges." "But there's no need to rush," Fendrel added, gesturing with his mug. "I've seen plenty of warriors, and none of them came close to achieving what you can do at your age. You're the most talented we've ever seen, kid." "And that's the problem," Rigger said, letting out a sigh. "Everyone expects me to overcome these challenges quickly. I expect it of myself, too." "That's the weight of talent," Garu commented, resting his chin on his hand. "But let me tell you something. Talent isn't everything. Resilience, patience, and the ability to learn from mistakes are just as important. Hontar nodded in agreement. Garu's right. Remember, Rigger, the path to strength isn't a race. It's a journey. You have time. If you keep training, you'll reach the saint level sooner or later. I think the reason for this might be a lack of real danger, Rigger explained. My techniques are improving, but my battle instincts aren't being challenged, which is also why I haven't lost control anymore. Fendrel, a swordsman at the saint level, had lost an arm to an old friend, leaving him without the strength to represent a challenge. That is indeed a problem. Moreover, you don't have a clear example to follow. You've seen the longsword of light, but it would help if I could show you now. At the sword sanctuary, you'd always have stronger opponents to face, Fendrel said. Hontar chimed in, there aren't many beasts that would challenge you unless you used only your sword, but you'd always feel like you could escape easily with magic. The conversation flowed naturally from there, with the three warriors sharing stories and advice. At some point, Garu suggested, you said you exhaust your mana every day, right? Why not go into battle with those beasts after spending your mana? That way, you wouldn't have magic at your disposal. Rigger was surprised. That is actually a great idea. Fendrel added, that could work, but I think you need to train for that type of combat first. You're too used to fighting with your magic. If you fought an A-rank monster without magic now, you'd lose badly, even with your supernatural strength. Hontar offered his perspective. I agree. Besides, if you really want to make this battle your spark, your techniques must be as refined as possible. Garu nodded in agreement. Rigger listened attentively to their advice. But then Fendrel shifted the tone of the conversation to something lighter. Now, changing the subject, are you into your master, kid? Fendrel was already laughing before Rigger could respond. Rigger was caught off guard, surprised by the abrupt change of topic. It's not like that. He tried to steer the conversation away, but Fendrel pressed on relentlessly. Oh? So you're planning to marry one of the two heiresses and become the leader of the tribe? Or maybe both? Hontar rolled his eyes, but a faint smile escaped. Rigger replied more seriously, actually, I see them as my little sisters, or maybe disciples. Then you're not denying Verdia? Fendrel countered, laughing loudly. Rigger realized he'd fallen into a trap. Laughter echoed through the porch, breaking any remaining tension. Even Rigger couldn't help but laugh. Moments like these reminded him that, despite his challenges and responsibilities, he was part of a community that supported him. After a few more stories, the conversation returned to combat-related topics. Rigger, you've been experimenting with magic while training in the sword god style, right? Garu asked. Yes, I've been trying to integrate magic into combat, Rigger replied. It's not easy, but I've had some successes. I need to find ways to do it without losing the advantages of the style. That's something only you can figure out, Fendrel said. No one else is combining magic with sword techniques at your level. It's uncharted territory. But don't let it overwhelm you, Hontar added. You have time. Remember, even the greatest warriors had to learn slowly. Rigger nodded, feeling a bit more relieved. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but he also knew he had the support of those around him. As night fell, they continued talking, alternating between battle stories and light-hearted moments. Rigger left that meeting with a new perspective, determined to follow his path without rushing but with unwavering determination. Back at his house, Rigger sat at his desk, picking up his notebook again. He reviewed his ideas, adjusted strategies, and made plans for the coming days. Despite his fatigue, he felt clearer about the path he needed to take. Talent without effort is useless. Strength without purpose is waste. Even with his resilience, this night reminded him of one thing. In his past life, he'd worked hard, sacrificing many things for his future, only to die with no one to blame but himself. He decided that even while dedicating himself to training, he would remember what he was trying to achieve. He would remember to enjoy life with the people he sought to protect. And even with his lofty goals, he wouldn't forget his roots, where he came from, and who supported him along the way. As he turned off the light and lay down, Rigger no longer felt the same anxiety that had haunted him before. The day had been long and productive, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The dry sound of an impact reverberated through the clearing, followed by the violent displacement of leaves and dust. The force of the strike caused nearby trees to tremble. At the center of the commotion stood Rigger, his expression serious, sword in hand, chest rising and falling rhythmically as he maintained his combat stance. 4 Doldia warriors surrounded him. Facing him stood Hantar, his father, a man whose presence was synonymous with authority. Beside him, 2 seasoned veterans of the tribe, their scars a testament to countless battles fought. The 4th was a rising young warrior. All of them were advanced-level fighters. Rigger relied solely on his physical strength, sword, instincts, and the techniques he had refined since childhood. No magic. His movements were a seamless blend of the Sword God style's aggression, with its swift and lethal strikes, and the adaptability of the North God style, filled with calculated dodges and devastating counterattacks. What truly set him apart, however, was his creativity. Rigger incorporated powerful kicks, acrobatic spins, and unconventional strikes that disrupted the rhythm of his opponents. Hantar was the first to move. His straightforward punch was so powerful that the air itself seemed to vibrate, scattering dust before it even reached its target. Rigger dodged by the narrowest of margins, his movements as fluid and swift as a feline's. His motion stirred dry leaves into swirling eddies, a spectacle that captured the other combatants' attention. Without losing momentum, Hantar attacked with a feint using a North God distraction technique, but Rigger spun on his axis and delivered a powerful sidekick. The blow connected with one of the warrior's torsos, sending him flying backward as if struck by a battering ram. The thunderous impact echoed through the clearing as the warrior slammed into a tree, collapsing to his knees, clutching his broken arm. "Don't stop!" Hantar roared, his voice thunderous. The remaining 3 advanced in unison, forming a pincer around Rigger. The tension in the air was palpable. Every move seemed meticulously calculated as the seasoned warriors sought to force Rigger into making a mistake. But Rigger was in control. He ducked under a diagonal slash, the blade grazing close enough to sever a few strands of his hair. A blade strike quickly followed, which Rigger blocked with his own sword before countering with a direct punch to his opponent's stomach. The strike was so forceful that the ground cracked under the shockwave, and the warrior collapsed unconscious on impact, rolling dozens of meters before coming to a stop, frothing at the mouth. The next warrior hesitated for a split second, and that was all Rigger needed to seize the offensive. He surged forward with impressive speed, delivering a sequence of sword strikes. Shallow cuts appeared on the warrior as he desperately tried to parry with his blade. Before Hantar could intervene, Rigger disarmed the warrior and stopped his blade after leaving a shallow cut on the opponent's neck. In the end, only Hantar remained standing. Father and son faced each other, both breathing heavily but neither showing any sign of yielding. "You've improved a lot, son," Hantar said, a predatory grin spreading across his face, a challenge in itself. "Just a little." Rigger's smile was confident, but not arrogant. He knew how strong his father was, and every fight against him pushed him to his limits. Rigger moved first, executing the longsword of silence so quickly that it left a streak in the air. Hantar ducked at the last second, spinning to the side and countering with a sweeping kick. Rigger leaped over it, but Hantar had anticipated the move. Rising fluidly, he unleashed an upward hook punch. Rigger released his sword midair, receiving the blow but using the momentum to slip inside his father's guard. In a flash, he executed a grappling technique, pinning Hantar to the ground. His claws stopped millimeters from his father's throat. "Yielded. You win." Hantar raised his hand, laughing as he caught his breath. The other warriors, still recovering, watched the scene with smiles of respect and admiration. Rigger extended a hand to help his father up, which Hantar accepted with visible pride in his eyes. "You pushed me to my limit today." "Thank you," Rigger said, bowing his head in gratitude to the other warriors. "You've earned it, kid." "It's not every day we see someone so young master techniques at this level," remarked one of the veterans, still massaging his shoulder after taking one of Rigger's blows. Hantar dusted off his clothes and looked at his son with curiosity. "And now? Resting, or do you have more plans for the day?" Rigger grinned, energized. "I'm learning Saint-level wind magic with Master Verdia today. Tornado. Want to watch?" Hunter's expression turned intrigued. "Of course. That's not something you see every day." As they walked back to the village, the relaxed atmosphere between them was filled with chatter about the approaching rainy season. "Oigar should arrive with the water god-style instructor before the rains begin," Hantar commented. "I hope he's found someone worthy. If he chose personally, It must be good enough. When they reached home, Rigger managed to convince Celine to join them. His mother accepted with a smile, always willing to support her son's achievements. Rigger led the group through the forest, followed closely by his students and subordinates, Lysena, Killian, Linnea, and Persina, with his master Verdia just behind. Hontar, his father, and Celine, his mother, had also decided to come along to witness Rigger's training in saint-level magic. Celine stayed close, her expression full of pride as she watched her son walk confidently. "You're growing so fast, my child. It feels like just yesterday you could barely conjure a small fireball, and now," she said, smiling warmly. "And now he's dragging us along a trail full of roots and rocks," Linnea grumbled, stumbling as she tried to keep up. "Slow down. We're not all machines like you." "What's the matter, Linnea? I thought you were stronger than Persina." "I don't hear her complaining," Rigger teased, looking over his shoulder with a playful smile. "How does your master keep up? She's a mage." Linnea groaned again. Verdia chuckled. "I'm also a rather skilled archer." The group continued until they reached a wide clearing, its ground covered with short grass and bathed in intense sunlight. The area was perfect for practicing powerful and potentially dangerous magic. Verdia stepped into the center of the clearing, turning to face the group. "Now, I'll demonstrate once. Pay close attention, little Rigger. Wind is your weakest element, so it's okay if you don't get it right away." Rigger crossed his arms, watching her intently. She began chanting the spell, her voice echoing through the clearing, blending harmoniously with the breeze. "O ancestral spirits of the winds, who have witnessed ages of glory and destruction, unite in eternal pact and grant me the power of the primordial storm. Let the skies weep in vortexes, and the earth tremble at the furious dance of currents. Tear the heavens, rise in endless spirals, and bring judgment with every twist. Manifest your boundless fury, tornado." The natural breeze soon turned into strong gusts, lifting leaves and dust into the air. Spirals of wind formed around her, quickly growing in height and intensity. The tornado roared, displacing the air with such force that even Hontar took a step back, shielding Celine with his arm. "This is incredible," Celine murmured, awestruck. "Indeed formidable," Hontar agreed, his tone heavy with respect. He could tell that if they were any closer, they'd all have been swept away by the violent gale. Verdia dispelled the magic with a wide gesture, and the clearing returned to silence. "This is Tornado," she explained. "A saint-level wind magic spell. Controlling such a spell demands more than power. It requires absolute concentration and a focused mind." Verdia turned to Rigger, her eyes filled with expectation. "Are you ready to try?" "I am, master." Verdia gestured for him to step into the center. "Show me what you've learned, Rigger." He took a deep breath, closing his eyes to feel the wind's flow. Years of training flashed through his mind, the repeated attempts to manipulate air for flight spells, his enhancements for high-speed movement techniques like flash step, and his failed attempts at vacuum magic, which, despite not succeeding, still gave him experience. In truth, wind magic was arguably the element he controlled most adeptly. "Wind is motion and force, but it's also balance," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. He began to chant, raising his arms slowly. "O spirits of the ancestral winds, witnesses of eras of glory and destruction, unite in an eternal pact and grant me the power of the primordial storm. Let the skies weep in vortices, and the earth tremble at the furious dance of the currents. Tear the heavens, rise in eternal spirals, and bring judgment with every rotation. Manifest your endless wrath, tornado." The air responded immediately, as if eager to heed the call. Currents began forming into gentle but precise spirals. As the tornado took shape, Rigger recalled something he had seen in his past life, a documentary about hurricanes and tornadoes. Tornadoes form from colliding masses of hot and cold air, creating intense rotation. But hurricanes, they require heat and water. A strong central pressure can turn something destructive into something even greater. The idea struck him like lightning. He decided to try. "What if I increase the pressure and add more layers?" he murmured, his eyes gleaming with renewed determination. Rigger concentrated, adjusting the airflow within the tornado. He began manipulating the outer layers to spin in opposite directions, while intensifying the pressure at the core. The tornado started to transform. Its edges widened and became more defined, while the core grew in power and density. Instead of a chaotic whirlwind, what emerged was a miniature hurricane, spinning with such intensity that cracks began forming in the ground below. The roar of the wind became deafening, and nearby trees swayed violently, as if ready to snap. The winds were so fierce that Verdia cast an intermediate barrier spell to block them. Rigger's magic was visibly more powerful than the tornado Verdia had conjured earlier. The tornado lasted several minutes, devastating the land and toppling trees that were tens of meters thick. A distant mountain suffered landslides as the spell raged on. When Rigger finally lowered his arms, releasing the magic, the hurricane dissolved slowly into a wave of wind that swept through the clearing, tousling everyone's hair. Silence fell. Persina was the first to break it. What was that? Linnea shook her head, speechless, while Killian and Lysena stared at Rigger as if they were in the presence of a living legend. Verdia, however, stood still, incredulous. She walked slowly to the center of the clearing, looking at Rigger with a mixture of amazement and fascination. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Rigger scratched his head, slightly flustered by his master's intense gaze. "I don't know. I just did it instinctively." He lied. For a moment, everyone thought Verdia would be furious. But, to everyone's surprise, she began laughing. It wasn't a polite or restrained laugh. It was a deep, joyous, genuine one. "He did that instinctively," she exclaimed between laughs. Everyone was even more shocked. Verdia had never laughed before. Even Hantar, who had known her the longest, stood open-mouthed. Rigger, on the other hand, was mesmerized by her laughter, as if angels were luring him closer. He blushed and looked away. When she finally stopped laughing, she ruffled his hair, her smile radiating pride. "With that magic, you can call yourself a Wind King." "Wind King?" Rigger repeated, confused. "That technique you just used, turning a tornado into a hurricane. It's a king-level spell, something only a handful of magicians in the world can perform. Even among the greatest, it's rare. I myself have mastered this magic, but what you just did..." She shook her head, awestruck. It seemed even stronger. Rigger looked at her, stunned. He hadn't realized he had achieved something so significant. "Am I a king-level magician?" Verdia laughed again. "You can bet on it." The group's light-hearted energy lingered as they returned to the village. However, upon arrival, the mood shifted. A crowd had gathered in the village center. Oigar stood with two humans, an elderly woman with a dignified posture and a teenager with bright, wary eyes. Guise was at the forefront, interrogating them with near-aggressive intensity. Rigger stepped forward, with Celine and Hantar close behind. Their presence was enough to draw the crowd's attention. "Guys, can I handle this?" Guise hesitated visibly, but reluctantly stepped back. Rigger had to admit, the beast folk's philosophy of respecting strength was genuinely useful. The elderly woman stepped forward, bowing her head slightly in a gesture of courtesy. "Thank you for intervening. My name is Eleonora, and this is my grandson, Idar." "Oigar, who are they?" Hantar asked, looking directly at the warrior. Eleonora is an advanced-level swordswoman in the water god style. She offered to become an instructor, but under one condition: we help by her other grandson, who was sold as a slave. Eleonora's sharp gaze fell on Rigger, narrowing slightly. "Oigar said your leader was very strong. But, you're just a child." Before anyone could respond, Idar spoke up. "If you're so strong, prove it." The clearing fell silent. Idar, about 13 or 14 years old, with sun-kissed blonde hair and wheat-colored eyes, radiated arrogance. Rigger smiled, crossing his arms. After a moment, Rigger turned to Taze, who had been watching silently. "Taze," Rigger called, his voice calm but firm. "Fight him." The young beastfolk, with reddish-brown hair and golden eyes, stepped forward, dropping his casual demeanor. He smiled slightly as he unsheathed his sword. "It would be an honor, Chief." Idar frowned, confused. "You're sending someone else to fight for you?" Rigger's gaze sharpened as he replied. "You seem to misunderstand something here. No one is obligated to accept your challenge. This is merely my whim, as I wish to test my subordinate." His tone grew more serious, releasing a faint bloodlust. Idar flinched, his arrogance faltering slightly. Eleonora intervened. "Very well. Let them fight. There's no need for further tension." Rigger nodded, stepping back to observe. The two young warriors positioned themselves in the center of the clearing, swords in hand. Taze took a stance from the North God style, his feet planted firmly, breathing steady. Idar adopted the fluid posture of the Water God style, his movements almost like a dance as he awaited Taze's first move. What followed was an intense duel that left everyone astonished. As soon as the fight began, it was clear that neither of them was weak. Taze moved swiftly, his strikes slicing through the air unpredictably. Idar, however, maintained a solid stance, blocking the attacks with precision. The clash seemed balanced at first, but Idar soon began utilizing the flow of the Water God style to put pressure on Taze, forcing him to retreat. Each counterattack deepened Taze's disadvantage. Idar was likely an advanced-level practitioner of the Water God style. That's when Taze revealed his true strength. Without warning, he conjured sharp earthen pillars beneath Idar's feet. Idar reacted quickly, leaping backward, but the attack pierced his foot, throwing him off balance. He recovered almost immediately, but there was no time to counterattack. The pillars had obscured his view of Taze, and when he searched for him again, a flaming blade was already mere meters away. He hastily used the flow technique to cut through the magic, but the resulting explosion still burned him and pushed him slightly back. "Silent casting?" Idar murmured, shocked. He had no time to process this further as a blade was suddenly placed against his throat. "Is that all?" Taze asked with a grin. "How did you do that?" Taze sheathed his sword. "Trade secret." Rigger praised him. "Well done, Taze. Once you reach the advanced level, you'll be even deadlier." "Thanks for the opportunity, boss." He then turned to Eleonora. "Now, let's discuss the terms more thoroughly." With that, the tension in the clearing began to ease. Taze received congratulations from his companions, while Idar seemed more inclined to listen and observe. Rigger had noticed several things about the Water God style that interested him. Its counters, its ability to cut through magic. Definitely techniques worth incorporating. The rains had finally arrived in the great forest. The sky remained gray and dense, with clouds so heavy they seemed only a few meters above the treetops. The constant sound of water dripping from the trees and rooftops was hypnotic. Trails that were once solid had turned into rivers, but this was customary. Their system of bridges and elevated pathways had endured many rainy seasons before. Inside his home atop a tree, sheltered from the storm, Rigger sat before Verdia, his mentor. The room, illuminated by torches, exuded the tranquility of a safe haven in contrast to the chaos outside. Verdia was explaining the theoretical complexity of cumulonimbus, a saint-level water spell capable of creating colossal storms. This was part of the final segment of the curriculum she had prepared for him. Her last lessons covered king-level earth magic, saint-level water magic, advanced barrier magic, and an introduction to magic circles. Additionally, she was teaching him the demon god language, as Rigger planned to visit the demon continent someday. Pay close attention. This spell isn't just a powerful conjuration, it's a balance of forces. You manipulate air and water, creating a dynamic system that can spiral out of control if the balance is lost, she explained. Rigger listened attentively, committing every word to memory. In the next room, his mother, Celine, was training intensively with Eleonora. Rigger could hear the rhythmic sound of wooden swords clashing, interspersed with the deep voice of the elderly instructor of the Water God style. Celine had practiced the Water God style during her time as a slave to protect her masters, but she had only reached the elementary level. Now, she had decided to see if she could achieve the intermediate level. Rigger glanced at the doorway, observing the scene. Eleonora's posture was rigid, her movements precise despite her advanced age. Her facial scars and the severity in her gaze told stories that few dared to ask about. Mealy's. Rigger thought, recalling the story he had heard when she was officially hired. Eleonora had lost her children to slave traders, and her grandchildren had been sold to a noble of Mealy's. Upon learning this, Eleonora had gathered all her savings and approached the noble to buy back her grandchildren. The noble agreed, and when she felt relief, he returned only one grandchild, claiming they had only agreed on the price for one. He then demanded the same price to buy the other. The hypocrisy of that nation, which prided itself as a bastion of justice, was infuriating. She used everything she had to save them and was still deceived, Rigger reflected, feeling a mix of anger and sympathy. Eleonora was in the tribe because she had made a deal. Train the warriors until one reached the advanced level in exchange for financial support to rescue her other grandchild. Her story seems true, but it never hurts to be cautious. Redirecting his attention to Verdia, Rigger mused, my impression of that nation worsens each day. The noble pursuing my master's life won't last much longer either. I believe I'll leave the great forest by next year. Between moments of study, magical practice, and physical training, Rigger reflected on his progress. He was learning the water god style with Eleonora, and although she considered him very talented, he wasn't as gifted as he was in the sword god style. In the North god style, he was competent but not exceptional. Even so, he valued the learning process. Each technique, each style, each fragment of knowledge was a piece he intended to combine in the future, creating something unique. However, he knew this idea of forging his own style would have to wait until he fully understood the use of Tuki, a skill still beyond his grasp. One step at a time, he reminded himself, turning back to Verdia and her explanations about magic. Master, are there any living mages at the god level? God-level mages? Verdia paused, thinking for a moment. Yes. Are there any currently? To my knowledge, the armored dragon king Perugius Dola and the demon god Laplace, who is sealed but alive, were the last confirmed god-level mages. Perhaps the dragon god or the technique god are at that level, but I've never seen them in person, nor do I know who they are. Some say there are ancient demons hidden away who might have reached that level, but I can't confirm the truth of such claims. Rigger absorbed the information. Although far from reaching such a grandiose level, he felt a growing urge to push his limits. Later, Rigger participated in a hunt organized by the tribe's warriors and the Iron Legion. The floods caused by the rains had brought aquatic crocodiles close to the tribes, posing a threat to the residents. Hunts like this were common during this season, and also served as an opportunity for Rigger to train his combat-based magical skills. Combining strength and speed, Rigger stood out in confronting the creatures. His mind, however, remained focused on something greater, the future. He planned to leave the Great Forest once he reached the Saint level in swordsmanship and mastered King-level earth magic and Saint-level water magic. When the time came, he intended to take about 30 members of the tribe to establish an Iron Legion base outside the Great Forest, with Taze as the group leader. This will be a good start, he thought, watching the crocodile corpses being swept away by the current. To prepare for this, Rigger had begun teaching Killian about leadership and what it meant to bear the responsibility of guiding others. He planned for Killian to assume leadership early on after his departure. Despite being just a child, Killian could already use advanced wind and earth magic, earning some respect. Rigger had also decided to restrict teaching magic to only the tribe members who showed great potential and loyalty. The more he learned about magic, the more Rigger realized its destructive potential. Even in his current state, he believed he could wipe out a large portion of the Great Forest if he poured all his mana into a hurricane spell. This knowledge, if wielded by the wrong hands, could be catastrophic, he reflected. It's better to be selective and cautious. Recently, Rigger had also been dealing with a growing restlessness. The tribe's mating season was beginning, and he noticed changes in his instincts. At times, his thoughts wandered while observing the women of the tribe, which deeply troubled him. Not because he was opposed to acting on such thoughts, but because he feared losing control and forcing someone against their will. I'm barely 8 years old. What will happen when I'm older? The thought alarmed him, further solidifying his resolve to leave the village as soon as possible. I need to reach Saint level before that happens. After the rainy season, I'll put Garu's suggestion into practice, facing an A-rank beast without using magic. I'm ready. I've already chosen my opponent. As the rainy season continued transforming the Great Forest, Rigger dedicated every day to preparing for his departure. He knew leaving the tribe wouldn't be easy, both emotionally and logistically. It wasn't a common decision, but his vision went beyond the immediate challenges. A saying from his previous world often came to mind: a society that doesn't know its history is doomed to repeat it. He delved into the history of the beast folk. The second beast god, Geiger, had once deterred any enemies or threats to the Great Forest. He had lived for a long time, but after his death, history repeated itself. Attacks, slavers, and other dangers returned because the deterrent force was no longer there. Rigger had no intention of following that same path. In the family cabin, Celine and Verdia were discussing Rigger's recent progress. "He's obsessed with improving," Celine remarked while cleaning her sword after sparring with Eleonora. "His instincts are getting stronger by the day. He doesn't realize it, but he's gradually reacting more aggressively or acting impulsively." Verdia nodded. "His talent is rare, but also dangerous. If he weren't so hardworking, he probably would have lost himself by now. I've considered telling him to take it easy, to say there's no need to rush, but it's quite the opposite. He can't rest now, and that truly saddens me." Celine exchanged a brief look with Verdia, but remained silent. Rigger gathered Taze, Killian, Lysena, Linnea, Persina, and other key members of the Iron Legion to discuss his plans. The improvised meeting room was lit by torches, and the sound of rain was muffled by the wooden walls. "We need to prepare to establish the Iron Legion's headquarters outside the Great Forest. Taze, you'll lead the initial group. It will consist of about 30 warriors, and I will personally select them." Taze looked at him with determination. "And where will we go?" "To a city just before Melee's capital, Tinaver. We need a location that's strategic but safe enough to establish the base. For now, focus on picking the right people." Meanwhile, Rigger began instructing Killian on leadership and strategy. "It's not just about strength, Killian. Leadership means understanding people and ensuring that every decision benefits the group. This is even more important when you possess knowledge others don't." Killian nodded, though his expression was serious. "Do you really think teaching magic is such a big risk?" Rigger sighed. "Yes. For now, I trust teaching magic only to members of the tribe. Even then, I'm extremely selective. This power cannot fall into the wrong hands." Killian seemed to reflect on Rigger's words as he continued explaining how to balance responsibility and trust. Elsewhere in the village, a meeting was taking place. Gustav, the tribe's chief, was accompanied by Guys and 2 other experienced warriors. On the opposing side were Celine, Hontar, Verdia, and Garu. Rigger's absence was notable but intentional. He was training with Fendrel at the time. Guys was the first to speak, his voice firm. "Rigger is strong, perhaps the most promising our tribe has ever seen. He shouldn't leave the village. His strength is vital to protecting our people." Celine immediately retorted, "Guys, this is ridiculous. We've never stopped our warriors from exploring the world. Why should it be any different with him?" "Because he is different," one of the other warriors exclaimed. "We've never had someone with such potential. If something happens to him out there, it will be a loss for all of us." Hontar, Rigger's father, intervened, his voice calm yet firm. "If we keep him confined here, we'll be killing that potential. He needs to grow, explore, and learn. Our tribe cannot be his limit. Frankly, he would have left already if it weren't for Verdia and Fendrel being here." Verdia remained silent, observing the exchange, while Garu crossed his arms and finally spoke. "I agree with Celine and Hontar. We can't keep Rigger here. He's already proven his responsibility and vision. To confine someone like him to the village would be a waste." The debate continued, with both sides intensifying their arguments. While Guys and his allies emphasized the importance of keeping Rigger as a deterrent and safety measure, Celine and Hontar argued that Rigger deserved to choose his own path and that his departure would bring long-term benefits. Finally, Gustav raised his hand, calling for silence. "I understand both sides. But in the end, the decision must be Rigger's. He's young, but he has shown enough maturity and strength to make his own choices. Let us respect that." The room fell silent for a few moments before everyone reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Rigger, unaware of the ongoing discussion, was training intensively with Fendrel. Amidst strikes and dodges, his thoughts wandered to the preparations he still needed to make. He knew leaving the village would not only be a personal milestone, but also an emotional break from everything he had ever known. "I'm still not strong enough," he thought. "But that's only a matter of time." Weeks passed, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. The tribe remained busy during this season, with constant movement as everyone dealt with the challenges brought by the relentless downpour. Amidst the bustling activity, Rigger focused intently on his plans. That morning, he was overseeing the training of his subordinates. "When we leave, it won't be a simple journey," Rigger began, locking eyes with everyone present. "We carry the name of our tribe and the responsibility to represent it. Taze, You will lead the group that will establish our base outside the Great Forest. Lysena and Killian, you will stay here to lead the remaining group. Linnea and Persina, listen to them. Most of your time will be focused on training. You have potential, so make good use of it. He then gave several instructions to the other key members. Do you all understand? Yes, Chief, they answered in unison. Rigger placed a firm hand on Killian's shoulder. I trust your judgment, but remember this, magic is a double-edged sword. Teach only those who demonstrate not just strength but also wisdom. This knowledge in the wrong hands could be more dangerous than any blade. Killian nodded seriously. I understand. As Rigger walked back home after the meeting, he felt his beastly instincts stirring again. It was mating season, and he could barely ignore the glances from the women of the tribe, which, under normal circumstances, wouldn't bother him. This is a problem, he thought. It's getting out of control. What will become of me if I stay here until the next season? The real issue was that the women weren't helping. They had started commenting on the way he looked at them, and instead of being restrained, they seemed eager to seduce him. From the young ones, around 11 or 12 years old, to the older women, their behavior was both unsettling and distracting. Strength, it seemed, was a strong incentive here. This urgency only reinforced his desire to leave the village soon. If the worst happened, he hoped it would be with a more mature woman. Even though he had spent 8 years in this world, he still hadn't fully adjusted to the casual view of childhood sexuality. Some psychological barriers from his past life remained, and he didn't think they would disappear anytime soon. At the very least, he intended to respect this world's age of maturity, 15 years. Later that day, he was called to a meeting with Gustav and the other leaders. Upon entering, he felt the tension in the air. Guys and 2 other warriors who shared his views wore stern expressions. On the other side, Celine, Hontar, Verdia, and Garu appeared more confident but alert. Other elders were also gathered in the tent. Gustav stepped forward. Rigger, I know you've already made up your mind, but I hope you'll consider the matter of leaving the Great Forest carefully. There's disagreement about what's best for you and the tribe. Keep in mind that the final decision is still yours. Before Rigger could respond, Guys interjected, Rigger, you know how much your strength means to us. If you leave, we'll lose one of our strongest defenders. Last time, we barely managed to hold off a North Saint. If a king or emperor-ranked opponent were to appear, the losses would be devastating. It's a selfish request, but I'm asking you to stay for the tribe. My mother, Celine, raised her voice in response. This is absurd. How many warriors leave the tribe every year to explore the world and are never stopped? Why should Rigger be any different? Keeping someone like him here is condemning his potential. Gustav turned to Rigger. What do you have to say, boy? Rigger took a deep breath before answering. He was beginning to feel a slight irritation toward Guys. The man claimed to act for the good of the tribe, but his persistence was grating. Speaking clearly and without hesitation, Rigger said, I understand the risks of leaving the village, and I also understand everyone's concerns. But I am not abandoning the tribe. I am strengthening it. My departure isn't an end, it's a beginning. I want to carry the name of the Iron Legion beyond the Great Forest, and that begins with me. The silence that followed was heavy but full of respect. Guy still seemed unconvinced, but he couldn't oppose Gustav's earlier statement that Rigger's decision would be his own. Finally, Gustav nodded. Then it's settled. Rigger, you'll have the tribe's support, but the responsibility will rest entirely on your shoulders. With the decision made, Rigger began preparing for his journey and his upcoming battle against the beast. If he couldn't reach Saint level in this fight, his departure would be delayed. He wouldn't risk exploring the world while losing control of himself. Amidst his tasks, he found a moment to sit with Verdia, who was watching him silently. Master, Rigger began, do you think I'm ready for this? Verdia, with a subtle smile, replied, Ready or not, Rigger, you're doing something few have the courage to attempt. Strength isn't just in your abilities, but in your determination to move forward. Rigger nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I could come with you if you want. I had planned to stay a few more years, but I wouldn't mind leaving a little earlier, she offered. Rigger hesitated before responding, There's no need, Master. I have some things to do on this journey, and I don't want to interrupt your break. He lied. In truth, he thought it would be too dangerous to bring her along, considering what he intended to do. He would have loved her company otherwise. She seemed about to say something but stopped midway, her expression a mix of concern and affection. "All right, little Rigger, but be careful." He only nodded, and the two, master and disciple, sat quietly, watching the rain fall as night descended. Current status: age, 8 years and 2 months. Mana reserves: Emperor-level magical skills, Fire Magic, Advanced Earth Magic, Saint Water Magic, Advanced Wind Magic, King Healing Magic, Advanced Detoxification Magic, Advanced Barrier Magic, Intermediate Howling Magic, Mastered Combat Skills, North God Style, Advanced Sword God Style, Advanced Water God Style, Elemental Combat with Natural Weapons, Claws, Instincts, etc. Advanced Battle Strength. High Saint-level Warrior Intellectual Skills, Reading and Writing in Beast God and Human. Languages: Language of the Demon God, knows a lot of vocabulary, but incommunicable mathematics, university-level practical skills. Excellent hunter, good teacher, very bad cook, it's almost inedible, but it can be eaten to avoid starving to death. Excellent builder, earth magic, good swimmer. The rain, which had poured over the great forest for months, was finally taking its last breaths. The gray clouds still lingered above the treetops, but the air was lighter, the raindrops falling sporadically, and the fresh scent of the earth mixed with the soft aroma of the leaves. Rigger was perched on one of the massive trees, his eyes closed and his mind calm. He focused on the sounds around him, letting the forest speak to him. He could hear the small animals moving through the leaves, the cautious steps of a deer in the distance, the soft sound of a squirrel digging the ground, and even the distant flight of a bird. But what caught his attention the most was the sound of the wind, carrying with it the sense of plants and wildlife, whispering secrets that only he could perceive with his sharp senses. As his ears filtered the environment, he could smell a nearby stream, the damp touch of a tree, and the fragrance of flowers that were just beginning to bloom. The end of the rainy season always brings a sense of renewal. How the forest breathes and prepares for the next season. It's curious how everything in the world seems to follow a cycle. I will miss this. Lost in thought, Rigger reflected on the life he had lived so far, the relentless training, his journey with the Doldia tribe, and the bonds he had forged with friends and mentors along the way. Although only 8 years old in this world, he already carried the experience of 28 years, shaped by the memories of his 2 lives. In such a short time, Rigger had already begun to distance himself from the person he once was in his previous world. He was maturing rapidly, not only physically but also in spirit, gradually adapting to the harsh realities of his new existence. Despite his young age, his appearance told a different story. His still developing frame already resembled that of a 10 or 11-year-old, marked by firm muscles, a piercing gaze, and the posture of a seasoned warrior, someone who had faced battles far beyond his years. Opening his eyes, Rigger activated his magical vision. His eyes gleamed with an unusual intensity, and for a moment, the world around him expanded. The forest stretched before him like a detailed painting, the mana surrounding all the vegetation, and he could see hundreds of meters with astonishing clarity. The trees, the animals, even the small details of fallen leaves on the ground, all became visible, as if reality itself was unfolding before his senses. He felt a surge of energy, as though he were at the peak of his growth spurt. With a swift motion, he activated Flash Step, and his body was enveloped in an explosion of energy, instantly vanishing from the top of the tree and darting toward the tribe. He could feel the strength in his muscles, his incredible speed, and the wind slicing across his face as he covered the kilometers in the blink of an eye. Rigger landed nimbly in the center of the village, his feet making a faint sound as they touched the ground. Around him, the atmosphere was completely different from usual. The smell of food in the air, the laughter, and the shouts of excitement gave the impression that the entire tribe was in a joyous frenzy. The rainy season, which had made their lives so difficult, had finally ended, and everyone was ready to celebrate the almost non-existent casualties that season. No great battles, no disasters. A reason to celebrate. This was mainly due to Rigger testing his techniques, but also thanks to the focused training done in the Iron Legion, in addition to the 7 young warriors who could use magic without incantations, making things much more convenient in battles. He watched the frantic movement of people around him. Some warriors were preparing the meat for the feast, using large knives to cut pieces. Others were setting up tents and tables, and a few more distracted ones were sparring in friendly duels, using wooden swords. It was a spectacle of simple fun but full of energy. Rigger. Verdia appeared from afar, her face with a smile that he could swear was a magical effect that made her glow. Her golden hair was loose and swaying hypnotically. She wore a simple dress, different from her occasional mage cloak, making her look like an angel among mortals. When she saw him, she gestured for him to come closer. Rigger stood in awe for a moment before walking toward her. "You're getting tall, little Rigger," she said, her voice full of pride. "Soon I won't be able to call you little anymore." Rigger laughed, looking at his master. He felt immense affection for her, a mix of deep respect and a bond that transcended just the master-student relationship. He knew that she had been instrumental in his development, both in magic and in mindset. Amid his confusion on how to handle the new truths of his society, she had been his guide, teaching him so much about life with her experiences and patiently listening to all his doubts. Soon, Celine approached, with a warm smile. "That warrior's body is already taking shape, isn't it?" she commented, looking at Rigger with a playful gaze. What Rigger liked most about his mother was her laid-back nature, which, despite her difficult past, had allowed her to adjust to life in the tribe. Celine and Rigger shared a strong bond, as his mother had always treated him with unconditional love, regardless of his mistakes or difficulties. Soon, they reached a campfire where Rigger's father, Hontar, was sitting. He was imposing, with powerful muscles and a posture that commanded respect. Despite the harsh way he treated others, Rigger thought of him as a classic tsundere. "Hey Dad, do you need help cooking the meat?" Rigger offered, wanting to be useful, but the air changed instantly when he heard 3 consecutive refusals. "No need," Hontar said seriously. "How about we go play darts instead, son?" his mother said, steering the conversation away. "Yeah, we can talk while doing that, little Rigger," his master added. The emotional blow was significant. Was my skill really that bad? Rigger forced a smile and agreed. "Sure, let's play darts." Meanwhile, Fendrel and Garu, his fencing instructors, were among the fighters dueling with wooden swords. Fendrel, always serious, was facing Garu, who had a more relaxed attitude but was equally skilled after Fendrel lost his arm. They exchanged quick, precise strikes, their swords clashing with force but leaving no marks. Rigger observed intently, absorbing every movement, every tactic used by the two. Around them, other warriors were engaged in equally lively activities. A group of younger warriors was involved in a fist fight, laughing as they exchanged punches carelessly, but with the contagious energy of youth. Nearby, some older members were playing a knife-throwing game, their expressions more serene, yet just as absorbed in the competition. The sound of laughter and celebration filled the air. The mating season was in full swing. The sacred beast was also there, in a small sanctuary, visibly excited when it saw Rigger. Its white fur shone, and it watched him with glowing eyes, as if eager for Rigger's next move. Whenever he approached, it let out a small bark of approval. Amid the celebration, some of the Iron Legion warriors started to chat eagerly about what was coming next. "The chief is going to challenge an A-rank beast without magic, right?" One of the warriors commented quietly, but loud enough for Rigger to hear. "I heard it's in 3 days." The news spread quickly, and the conversations grew more animated. "What madness! We'll need a group of the best warriors to kill one safely." In a corner, Gustav, the tribe's leader, climbed onto a small makeshift platform and raised a cup. All eyes turned to him. "Today is a day of celebration," he said in his strong, commanding voice. "We've overcome another rainy season, another tough time. And more importantly, we came out of it stronger than ever. The Doldia tribe remains united, and for that, we must toast to our strength, our courage, and the future that awaits us." The crowd applauded, clapping and shouting in approval. The atmosphere became even more vibrant, with everyone sharing the sense of unity. Rigger, observing his tribe members, felt a strong connection to them, something he hadn't felt in his previous life, a sense of belonging. Even knowing that he would leave soon, the feeling of being part of this tribe, this family, was something he would never forget. As the feast continued, Rigger stepped aside to a quiet corner, chatting with friends and simply enjoying his rare moment of rest, soaking in the warmth of the night and the feeling of camaraderie. The party raged on as the festive mood took over everyone. He walked a little and saw Killian, who was showing some of the tribe's children how to throw stones. His movements were quick and precise. The wind magic he used to control the stone's direction seemed magical to the children. "Your control is great, Killian," Rigger commented with a smile. Killian smiled back, his eyes shining with confidence. "I've been training a lot, Chief." "Keep training, then." Being young, You need to at least be strong enough to lead the Iron Legion. Rigger observed the young man, one of the most promising of his generation, with the ability to use advanced wind and earth magic. Killian was still a child, but his determination was unwavering. Rigger had also seen that he had potential for the water god style, so he told him to train more seriously in that style. He had already decided that, one day, Killian would take on a leadership role in the Iron Legion. Further along, Taze was helping Lysena assemble a set of improvised weapons for a small combat tournament. They were having fun, but Rigger could see the intensity in their gazes. Taze, with his earth magic skills, and Lysena, with her talent for barriers, were getting closer to an advanced level. It was remarkable how they communicated with just their eyes, their abilities complementing each other perfectly. Taze, Lysena, don't forget to rest as well. Rigger called, but they were so focused on preparing for the fight that they hardly noticed his presence. Linnea was further ahead, engaged in a friendly match with other warriors from the tribe, testing her strength and agility. She still seemed so small, but already demonstrated the skills of a fighter. Her fire magic made her opponents hesitate, and her quick, precise attacks were impressive. "Hey, don't be so aggressive, Linnea," Rigger warned. "It was you, Chief, who told me that in the Sword God style, aggression is always the answer," she said proudly, with her arms crossed, as if she had discovered the truth about life. Amid the entire celebration, he found Persina, who was sitting in a corner, observing the party, with a large plate of meat hidden behind herself. The girl was absorbed by the atmosphere around her. She was quiet but always attentive, although it seemed as if she was protecting her meat. She even glared aggressively at him when he passed by. Rigger then went to look for his master. She was talking to another woman from the tribe. As he approached, he noticed how the firelight from the campfire reflected in her hair, creating an almost magical aura around her. She was more radiant than ever. The beauty of Verdia seemed to increase as time passed, not just because of her appearance, but because of the confidence and kindness she radiated. "So, Rigger," she asked, her eyes observing him with curiosity, "are you having fun?" "Yeah, but I might be a little nervous about facing the beast in 3 days. I've already defeated one with magic, but with just the sword, I'll be very limited." "You'll make it, and even if you don't, you can try again and again. You'll always have us to support you," Verdia said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Rigger felt a comforting warmth in his chest when he heard her words. She always knew how to give the right kind of support at the right moment. He smiled back at her, feeling more determined to continue his journey. "I know, Master. One day, I'll surpass all these limits." Verdia smiled, a sparkle in her eyes. "I know that. Just don't forget to enjoy the celebration while you can, Rigger." Rigger nodded, and for a moment, got lost in her eyes. He tried to imagine what his new life would be without her, and once again realized how important she had been. The music and dancing continued around them, but Rigger was calmer now. He knew what he needed to do. The party was coming to an end, and the night slowly descended upon the tribe. The last laughs and conversations began to fade, and the flames from the campfires began to die down, leaving only a soft glow illuminating the tired faces of the warriors and villagers. When everyone had gone to sleep, Rigger got up. He knew this would be his only chance to face the A-rank beast without anyone interfering, as they were all tired. So he lied, saying he would face it in 3 days, so he could truly challenge himself. He was sure there would be warriors lurking to save him if something went wrong, so what would be the point of facing it without magic? When the last group of warriors retreated to their homes, he silently sneaked back to the exit of his house, aware that most of the tribe was already sleeping. As he opened the door, Rigger was surprised by a sight that made him stop for a moment. On the branch just ahead of the door, carefully hanging, was a sword. It was adorned with intricate details and a blade that emanated a unique aura. He approached cautiously, not recognizing the sword. It was a piece he hadn't seen before. It had a unique appearance, unlike anything he had used before. The scabbard was black, with golden and blue details. He carefully took the sword by the hilt, the weight of the blade perfectly balanced in his hand. With a sense of reverence, Rigger unsheathed the sword, examining it more closely. The blue blade extended before him with impressive lightness, almost ethereal, with a soft glow that seemed to change in intensity as the night light touched it. At the beginning of the blade, the name was engraved, Tsukikage, Moonshadow. There was something about it that unsettled him, as if it was more than just a simple weapon. "This is definitely not an ordinary sword," Rigger thought, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The weight of the sword and its exotic appearance made it clear that it was not just any weapon, but something forged with great care, perhaps even magic involved. He raised the sword before him, and for a moment, he felt as though the blade was asking to be used. It was an indescribable feeling, as if the sword was aligned with him, ready to unleash all its power. He then looked at the small note hanging with the sword. He then laughed. She knew, of course she knew. The note left with the sword had the simple message, "Good luck, little Rigger." This phrase at that moment touched his heart deeply. With every word he remembered, he felt a weight of responsibility, but also a quiet pride. Verdia believed in him, trusted him, and this sword represented much more than just a weapon to kill for him. With one last glance at the room and the tribe sleeping in the distance, Rigger turned and left the house, determined. He could wait no longer. His journey was about to begin. The A-rank beast awaited him, and he had to be ready. He crossed the forest, the sword in his hand emitting a soft glow as he advanced, as if every step was bringing him closer to his destiny. The sound of the leaves whispered in the wind as Rigger advanced through the dense forest, his feet pressing firmly into the damp soil, the strong scent of earth filling his nostrils. Sunlight barely pierced through the canopies of the towering trees, creating shadows that danced around him. He carried 2 swords. At his waist hung Tsukikage, the sword entrusted to him by Verdia. On his back was his regular sword, the one he had initially planned to use. He breathed deeply, preparing for the challenge he had set for himself. He had already exhausted all his mana constructing extremely dense earthen structures before entering that territory. It was a dangerous gamble, but a necessary one. He had been training to reach the Saint level for 2 years now. Fendrel had told him that with his talent and the speed at which he reached the advanced level, he should already be there. However, the lack of strong opponents and real pressure had caused him to stagnate. As he approached the area where he knew the silver mist wolf reigned, his instincts began to scream. The sensation was like an electric shock through his nerves, a shiver climbing his spine. He was out of mana, approaching a dangerous enemy. His body was warning him. But he shook his head, pushing the fear aside. The whole point was for it to be dangerous, after all. He kept moving forward, senses sharp, ignoring the growing discomfort. The air felt denser here, almost oppressive. The sounds of the forest had diminished, as if even the insects feared disturbing this place. Suddenly, the surroundings opened into a clearing. The ground was littered with battle marks, and pieces of flesh scattered across the area exuded a metallic scent of blood. His eyes fell on the remains of the ruler of that territory, the original silver mist wolf. Its massive body, over 7 meters long, lay destroyed. The powerful claws and silver fur, which should have symbolized its strength, now lay motionless, covered in deep wounds and bite marks. The figure responsible for the massacre was feasting on the fallen opponent's flesh. The new wolf was half the size of the original mist wolf, but equally impressive. The creature was unlike anything Rigger had expected. Its blue-green fur shimmered with a supernatural hue under the forest's diffuse light, moving as if alive, and its eyes gleamed with terrifying intelligence. A mutation, Rigger thought, recalling Verdia's lessons. Mutated monsters were rare but incredibly dangerous. Before he could react, his instinct screamed again, more intensely than ever. Run. It was a primal command, straight to his core. For a moment, he hesitated. But then the wolf turned its head, fixing him with eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. He saw the creature's muscles tense, and in the next instant, it charged with a speed he could barely follow. Rigger leapt back, trying to evade the attack, but wasn't quick enough. The creature's claws grazed his throat, leaving a deep cut. Pain exploded in his mind as blood began to flow. Without time to process, he activated Flash Step, though a version using only Tuki, which made it less effective. The movement was instinctive but poorly executed, and he stumbled upon landing, feeling the impact in his knees. Damn it! With the wolf on his heels, he broke into a frantic run, dropping to all fours to gain more speed, a classic technique of the Doldia tribe. His arms and legs worked in perfect sync, propelling him across the uneven terrain. Branches scratched his skin, but he had no time to think about it. With each step, he felt the wolf drawing closer, its figure just a blur moving through the forest. The attacks came relentlessly. The wolf leaped between the trees with deadly precision, cutting off Rigger's path like a predator toying with its prey. He barely dodged the strikes, the beast's golden eyes glowing in the mist that began to shroud the area. Rigger knew he was being tested. "If I could use magic, you'd already be cut into 100 pieces," he growled, frustrated. This monster was fast, so fast he couldn't hope to react to its attacks. His magic eye, active from the start, helped him track the creature's movements, but even then, he couldn't land a hit. The wolf was too fast, and its shimmering blue fur created illusory images as it moved, further complicating the fight. The chase went on for what felt like hours, wounds and cuts accumulating across his body. Rigger was running out of breath, the blood from his throat leaving a crimson trail in his wake. The clarity of his thoughts was beginning to fade. He knew he couldn't escape. The wolf was toying with him. It could have caught him at any moment. "I need to fight. Now." Rigger's mind worked quickly as he ran. He needed a plan. He couldn't win by running, and a direct attack was suicide. He would have to outsmart the monster. Cutting a detour in his path, he slightly slowed his pace, feigning weakness. His legs trembled, and he allowed the wolf to see it. It was a risk. If he failed, it would be over. The monster growled, its eyes gleaming with sadistic delight. It charged again, claws ready for the final blow. A pure arrow of force and speed, aimed directly at Rigger. He felt the hairs on his neck stand on end, his body entirely on alert. Seconds stretched into eternity as he prepared his response. At the last moment, Rigger sidestepped, nearly crawling on the ground to evade the creature's claws. He drew the blue sword, attempting the fastest longsword of silence he could muster, but the strike hit nothing but air. The creature was too fast. As Rigger glanced back, he saw the wolf already repositioned just a few meters away, its predatory stance unchanged. But it wasn't just speed. The illusions created by the monster's shimmering fur made tracking its real position almost impossible. Every step left visual echoes, after images that confounded his senses. Rigger tightened his grip on his sword and adjusted his breathing. His eyes narrowed as he focused his magic eye again, studying the wolf's movement patterns. Even with the ability, tracking it was like trying to catch a bolt of lightning amidst a storm. The wolf lunged again, but this time, he was ready. Rigger rolled forward, dodging the sharp claws that slashed through the air just above his head. Rising fluidly, he swung Tsukikage in a downward arc. The blade glowed with the force of his Tuki, but once again, it struck nothing but empty space. The monster leaped back, its growl morphing into a low guttural sound that vibrated through the air. It circled him, its glowing eyes filled with calculated malice. It seemed to savor the fight Rigger was putting up, a predator playing with its prey. Rigger gritted his teeth. He was losing blood fast, and his strength was waning. Each movement felt heavier, slower. "It's wearing me down." The clearing around him seemed to close in, as if the environment itself was conspiring against him. The ground was slick with damp leaves and streaks of his own blood. The surrounding trees formed a natural barrier, limiting his escape options. "I need an opening. Anything." He kept his eyes locked on the wolf, tracking its movements carefully. The creature began to pick up speed, running in tighter and tighter circles around him. The sound of its paws against the ground created a sinister rhythm, a prelude to his impending death. Then the wolf attacked again, leaping toward him with claws extended. Rigger swung the longsword of silence again, but the monster evaded at the last moment, twisting its body in an almost impossible motion. "It's intelligent." The strike grazed the wolf's flank, leaving a shallow wound, but before Rigger could capitalize, searing pain erupted in his right leg. The monster's jaws clamped down on his thigh, the sound of teeth tearing through flesh and muscle echoing across the clearing. He let out a primal scream, the pain cutting through the forest's silence. Reacting quickly, he brought his sword down in a desperate slash, but the wolf released his leg and jumped back before the blade could connect. Rigger collapsed to his knees, blood pouring from his wounded leg. His breathing was labored, and the world spun around him. The pain was unbearable, but he knew he couldn't stop. "If I fall now, I'm dead." The wolf began circling him again, like a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His blood dripped steadily onto the ground, and the clearing seemed to spin. With immense effort, Rigger forced himself to his feet, using his sword for support. He steadied his stance, ignoring the throbbing pain that consumed his body. His hands trembled, but his eyes remained locked on the creature. "I'm still alive. As long as I'm alive, I can fight." The wolf suddenly halted, crouching low. Rigger recognized the stance, It was preparing for a high-speed charge. This was it. Now or never. As the monster lunged, Rigger did something unexpected. He threw himself to the side, feigning a fall and leaving himself completely exposed. The creature surged forward, believing its prey was defenseless. At the last moment, Rigger focused all his remaining strength into a single movement. With a roar of effort, he swung his sword in a swift, precise arc aimed at the wolf's neck. The blade connected, but only superficially. The wolf instinctively twisted away, and Rigger felt the slight resistance of his cut. Before he could follow through, a sudden devastating force struck his chest. The wolf had used its hind legs to kick him mid-turn, the impact like a speeding truck. He felt his ribs crack and the air rush out of his lungs as he was hurled dozens of meters away, rolling violently along the ground. He groaned but didn't let go of his sword. Regaining his spatial awareness, he forced himself to stand again. Rigger was on the ground, bleeding and exhausted, as the wolf circled him like a living shadow. Each movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his body. He knew he was on the verge of passing out. "I can't last much longer." Yet he continued to breathe, forcing himself to focus. He would need something beyond strength or skill. He would need a miracle. The sound of Rigger's ragged breathing was drowned out by the wolf's low, constant growl. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as though awaiting the inevitable conclusion. Every muscle in Rigger's body screamed for rest, but he knew that giving in meant death. The wolf, now with blood staining its maw, watched him with predatory patience. It circled the young warrior like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every movement seemed calculated, as if it already knew the fight was over. Rigger staggered as he rose, his injured leg barely responding. Using his blue sword as a crutch, he straightened and faced the wolf. "I won't fall here. I can't fall here." The creature attacked again, but this time, Rigger evaded purely on instinct, rolling aside and breaking into a desperate sprint. He had no plan, just the overwhelming urge to survive. His breathing was ragged, and every step was agony, but he pushed on, moving like a beast clinging to life. The trees blurred past him as he ran, leaping from trunk to trunk, ignoring the pain and driven only by instinct. But the wolf was relentless. Its pursuit was merciless, its paw steps pounding through the forest like a drumbeat of death. Rigger knew he was at his limit. His body should have given out long ago, yet he remained standing, fueled by sheer determination. During a leap between two trunks, his leg finally gave out. He felt the tendons snap, and his balance faltered. The world seemed to slow as he fell, the wind howling in his ears. Acting on instinct, he hurled the common sword from his back toward the wolf. The strike carried the precision of a North God technique, but the creature easily dodged, twisting its body in midair without losing momentum. Rigger crashed into another tree, the impact reverberating through his battered body. But the sword he had thrown bought him a single second. Turning his head slowly, he saw the beast leaping toward him, claws and fangs poised for the final strike. Ignoring his shredded leg and countless wounds, he launched himself at the creature, using the tree as leverage. This is it. In that last moment, something within him clicked. A spark of clarity flashed through his mind as he gripped Tsukikage with both hands. He had no strength left, but his mind, honed by years of combat, guided him instinctively. "At least I'll take you down with me, you bastard." With an almost automatic motion, Rigger raised the sword and executed the most familiar technique from his training, the longsword of silence. But this blow felt different, faster, sharper. The blade gleamed briefly, a golden streak that sliced through the air in a horizontal arc, aiming for the wolf's neck. The creature dodged, but the speed and precision of the strike surpassed anything Rigger had ever achieved. The blade struck the wolf at the top of its skull, slicing through flesh and bone before stopping. The monster's body kept moving, crashing into Rigger and slamming them both into the trunk of a nearby tree, the sound echoing through the forest. The wolf's lifeless body collapsed on top of him, motionless. Silence enveloped the clearing. Rigger, still leaning against the tree, crawled out from under the wolf's corpse. The creature was undoubtedly dead, its breathing fading until it ceased entirely. He let out a long sigh, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. "I did it." His thoughts grew hazy, and he realized he was teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. Blood continued to flow from his wounds, his vision growing blurry. As his awareness faded, he focused on the sound of his own heartbeat, still pounding, and the cold air filling his lungs. For all his injuries, for all the pain, he was still alive. And then, for the first time in years, Rigger succumbed to physical exhaustion and fainted. Rigger slowly opened his eyes, feeling a gentle pulse coursing through his body, as though he were being wrapped in a comforting warmth. His vision was blurry, but his ears caught a familiar, kind and warm voice, and let him recover with a healthy body. Exhale. The magic radiated over him, gradually restoring his strength. As his mind cleared, he saw Verdia crouching beside him, her gaze fixed on him with evident concern. When she noticed that Rigger was regaining consciousness, her expression softened, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "Are you all right?" Verdia's voice was soft, but it carried a subtle note of concern that Rigger rarely heard from her. She watched him intently, probably waiting for any sign that the healing had fully taken effect. Rigger forced himself to sit up, feeling his energy returning. He used a healing spell on himself and gave a faint smile as he felt his strength spreading through his body. "Yes. I'm feeling better now." "Thank you, Master." Verdia stood up, relief crossing her face. "That's good. I came looking for you after you were gone all night. I was so worried. You still need some time to recover, but the worst is over." "There were some complications," Rigger admitted. "That wolf over there was a mutation. It had already killed the silver mist wolf when I arrived. I had to fight for my life." He paused, reflecting on his near-death experience. "But maybe I should thank it after all." He grabbed the blue blade and focused on the Tuki flowing through his body. A moment later, he smiled. Moving forward, he accelerated rapidly, far faster than he ever had with his previous flash step technique. He shot past a tree like a bullet, leaving only a deep slash at its base. The trunk toppled over with a resounding crash in the silent forest. This was the true signature move of the sword god style, the longsword of light. Verdia observed him for a moment before clapping excitedly. A joyful smile spread across her lips as she congratulated him, her pride for him shining even brighter than his own. "Congratulations, little Rigger. You're now a sword saint," she declared, stepping closer. "I hope the sword has been useful." Rigger's eyes focused on the blade. Its elegant blue design was both sleek and aggressive, emanating an almost predatory aura. "I bought it from an elf who had kept it in his collection for years. It's one of the 49 blades crafted by Julian Jalisco, the Demon Realm artisan, using the bones of the Dragon King Kajikut. It's yours now." Rigger's eyes widened, feeling the weight of the gift. "I was torn between giving you a staff or a sword," Verdia continued with a faint smile. "But I chose the sword because you can embed a magic stone in it. That way, it can act as your casting focus. However, to do that, you'll need to visit the Dwarven territory. Only they can modify such a blade without compromising its properties." Rigger blinked in surprise. "Properties? What kind of effect does it have?" Verdia smiled, a playful glint in her eyes. "Tsukikage becomes sharper and more durable the hotter its surroundings get." For a moment, Rigger was speechless. His mind raced with possibilities, imagining the potential of such a weapon. "That means..." He trailed off, gazing at the blade in awe. "I can use my fire magic with it almost without limits, can't I?" Verdia nodded. "I haven't confirmed it with your level of magic, but when I tested it with an advanced spell, it seemed to handle it perfectly." Rigger's heart raced as he gripped the Tsukikage tightly, feeling the energy it exuded. The blade seemed attuned to something within him. "Thank you, Master," he said, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. She had spoken casually about it, but finding a sword that perfectly matched his combat style surely hadn't been simple. "Let's return to the village. You need to truly rest now." Rigger agreed, and the two began walking back toward the village. Along the way, they continued their conversation. Rigger couldn't help but ask about the future of the Iron Legion, and more importantly, the sharing of magical knowledge he was developing. "Master, what do you think about making knowledge of chantless magic and the idea that mana can grow during childhood public?" Rigger asked, studying Verdia closely. He already knew this was a delicate subject, but her answer felt crucial to his plans. Verdia pondered for a moment, her eyes focused on the path ahead. "I agree that this knowledge should be shared, but it must be done gradually. We can't just throw it out into the world unprepared. There are too many implications. It's not something to be rushed." Rigger nodded, understanding her caution. Do you think it could be taught more widely someday? Yes, eventually. But for that, you'll need to be stronger first. If you intend to spread these methods, many will come after you. Your strength, both magical and physical, must be unquestionable. And I'm telling you this because I know you have that potential. Verdia looked at him with a soft smile, as if appraising him. When you decide to focus on your magical research and developing your potential, Renoa would be a good place. There you can delve even deeper into your studies. I'll stop by at some point to visit a disciple. I've already decided I'll go there at some point, Rigger replied. But first, I need to ensure the Iron Legion is ready for the future. Their conversation shifted to other topics. Verdia spoke of her own future, revealing that she would leave the Great Forest in a few years. I'll be leaving the Great Forest soon too, young Rigger. Perhaps in 5 years or so. I've been here a long time, and my journey will eventually take me elsewhere. Perhaps we'll meet outside the forest if fate allows. Rigger already knew Verdia was a free spirit, but hearing it aloud made him feel that their time together was drawing to a close. The sense of impending loss was inevitable. The Great Forest wasn't his ultimate home, just as the tribe wouldn't be his permanent origin. Rigger nodded, and Verdia continued sharing stories and offering him advice about the world beyond the Great Forest. When they arrived at the village, the scene before them was familiar and welcoming. Warriors and villagers moved about, greeting Rigger with respect. He waved back with a smile, though his mind was elsewhere, contemplating what was to come. Soon, they reached his home. Training outside were Hontar, Garu, and Fendrel. Before he could say anything, Rigger was caught off guard by his mother, who ran to him, her face filled with concern. Rigger. She wrapped him in a tight hug, almost knocking the air out of him. Are you all right? You left without saying anything. You drove me crazy. Her voice shifted between relief and scolding. Rigger, still being crushed, responded with a tired smile. I'm fine, Mom. And I did it. She let him go, frowning in confusion. Did what? He raised Tsukikage and said proudly, I am now a sword saint. Fendrel was the first to react, letting out a hearty laugh. Ha! I knew you had it in you, kid. He walked over to Rigger and gave him a strong pat on the shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. Hontar and Garu nodded enthusiastically, Rigger's father looking at him with a conflicted expression. A sword saint at such a young age. Garu murmured, clearly impressed. You're going to make history, kid. You're already far beyond the rest of us. Hontar smiled, his voice filled with fatherly pride, mixed with a touch of unease. Our tribe has never had a warrior of saint rank so young. While Rigger's mother announced she would prepare a special dinner to celebrate, Fendrel stepped forward. Well done, Rigger. With this, my goal here is complete. His voice was clear and direct, but there was a trace of satisfaction in it. I'll leave the Great Forest and return to my kingdom. Irina and I have our own paths to follow. The announcement caught many by surprise, but Fendrel raised a hand to silence any objections. This has already been decided. The time I've spent here will stay with me forever, but I also have Irina, and I want to have children of my own. And Rigger. He stepped closer, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. I know the whole world will hear your name one day. I truly recommend that you visit the Sword Sanctuary to refine your skills further. To my knowledge, the current sword god became a sword saint at 15. You've already surpassed him in that regard, and I'm sure your potential can take you even further than he has gone. Rigger nodded, absorbing the farewell words. Even though Fendrel wasn't his master, he had still been a teacher, imparting almost everything Rigger knew about the sword god style. Meanwhile, his mother crossed her arms, looking at him with a half-maternal, half-playful smile. Sword saint or not, you're still my little boy. She pinched his cheeks, eliciting laughter from those around, while Rigger contemplated how to salvage his dignity. Verdia, who had been silently observing until then, finally spoke. This is just the beginning. Her voice was gentle, but carried a note of pride. Honestly, I've never seen anyone with as much talent as Rigger. I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a legendary figure like the Armored Dragon King or Kalmanai. They then headed inside to celebrate the occasion. Verdia also informed him that his final graduation would take place in 5 months. As days passed, Rigger began training in new techniques he had devised after learning to consciously control his Tuki. While observing the tribe, he realized that as they grew in scale, they would need a better hierarchical system for organization. Thus, he began working on it. One day, while walking to the training field where the members of the Iron Legion were exercising, a sense of pride welled up within him as he watched how the tribe and its allies were evolving. The terrain, shaped with earth magic to be more resilient, was perfect for training. The magically reinforced soil not only created a robust field but also increased durability, allowing warriors to train without worrying about damaging the environment. He paused for a moment, watching the warriors' movements. Some were engaged in hand-to-hand combat, practicing the tribe's unarmed style. Others were using magic or training with swords and other weapons, showcasing skills inspired by the North God, Sword God, and Water God styles. The Iron Legion had grown impressively since its foundation, uniting members of the tribe and others from surrounding tribes under a common purpose: defending the Great Forest. Some were seasoned fighters, while others were just beginning, but all seemed committed to becoming stronger. Killian spotted him and approached, noticing Rigger's contemplative stance. "Chief, do you have something in mind? Anything else for the training?" Rigger turned to him. "Yes, Killian. We need to be more versatile. The Iron Legion currently has 4 combat methods available: the tribe's unarmed style, North God, Sword God, and Water God styles." He paused, watching the warriors practicing these styles. "I want you to guide the warriors in testing their aptitude in each of these styles, even the more experienced ones. Some may naturally excel in one over the others, but this will help us better utilize everyone's potential." Killian nodded, understanding the logic behind the proposal. "I see. Should I do the same with magic?" "Exactly," Rigger confirmed with a nod. "It's important for them to become more adaptable. We can't rely on a single style in combat. Our ultimate goal goes far beyond that. Each warrior needs to be capable of reacting in different ways." He approached one of the warriors training with a sword, observing their movements. "I've also gathered information about the surrounding tribes. Many of the warriors here, whether official members or not, are already part of the Iron Legion. We need to expand it, Killian. Extend the Legion to the neighboring tribes. To do this, I've prepared a hierarchy system to be implemented once the number of members exceeds a certain limit." Rigger pulled a notebook from his clothes and handed it to Killian. The notebook was filled with detailed records of various styles, spells, and tactics he knew. It also contained information about the neighboring tribes, with suggestions on integrating new members and establishing a more efficient command system. This notebook contains everything you need to implement this hierarchy. It will help make our Legion more structured and ready for the future. Killian flipped through the pages attentively. "All right, I'll start working on this immediately." As second in command, you need to be strong, Killian. Don't try to do everything alone. Delegate tasks. You're already an excellent magician, but you still need physical training, especially in the Water God style, Rigger added, tilting his head slightly. He knew Killian had impressive magical abilities, but also understood that physical training was crucial in this world. A pure mage was as fragile as paper against saint-ranked warriors. Killian nodded seriously, a hint of determination in his eyes. "I know. I won't let my magic be my only strength. I'll improve in everything to meet the chief's expectations for the future." Killian seemed to regard him as some kind of deity, taking every decision he made as absolute. While Rigger didn't see this as inherently bad, he knew he wasn't infallible. One day, Killian would realize he was just another person, with flaws and strengths. Rigger turned his gaze back to the training field, his eyes landing on Lysena, who was training in the distance. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, as if caught in the act. Rigger felt a small smile forming on his lips but refrained from commenting. He had already deduced it was a childhood crush, but he saw her as nothing more than an adorable kid. He turned to Killian, who had also noticed the silent exchange but said nothing. Rigger decided to share his future plans. "When Linnea and Persina leave for Renoa, you and Lysena should follow them. By then, the Iron Legion should be more stable, and you'll also need to gain experience. We can't afford to halt growth." Killian looked at Rigger with a thoughtful expression. "Understood. We'll follow your lead. The Iron Legion needs to be strong, but it also needs time to mature. When the time comes, we'll be ready to go." Rigger nodded. This would certainly not be a small project, but he was confident. With the hierarchy system in place, diversified training, and the integration of neighboring tribes, the Legion was on its way to becoming a formidable force. "Ask me about anything you're unsure of while I'm still here," Rigger said, refocusing on Killian. "My master told me I'll learn Saint-level water magic and King-level earth magic on the same day. That will also be my last day in the tribe." Fendrel had departed from the tribe the day before, his absence leaving a quiet void in the village. Many had gathered to bid him farewell, their voices filled with encouragement and bittersweet pride. Alongside him was Irina, her determination matching his as they set off together. Their departure was a reminder of the paths that lay beyond the safety of the great forest, paths that not all could walk but which some were destined to follow. The clearing was bathed in the morning sunlight filtering through the treetops. The crackling sound of flames echoed as Rigger swung his sword, now imbued with fire. The heat around him was intense, yet he remained focused, controlling each flicker of the flame as if it were an extension of his own body. Verdia stood a few steps away, watching him intently. "Your control keeps improving. With your ability to summon flames at will, few opponents will be able to stand against you now." Rigger reduced the intensity of the fire, adjusting it until it became a thin, steady layer along the blade. "I can maintain it throughout a battle, but I still need to fine-tune the timing." "Good. Your talent has always leaned more toward fire and earth magic. It's a shame I only know advanced-level fire spells," his master commented. Rigger gave a faint smile, a challenging gleam in his eyes. "My control over fire has already surpassed wind. Earth is close behind, too." He raised his hand, and a translucent barrier formed beside him, solid and well-structured. "I can now cast at least one intermediate barrier spell without chanting." Verdia nodded. "Though your aptitude for barriers lags slightly, that's only in comparison to your other spells. Your progress is still remarkable." Before he could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Warriors began emerging from the forest, armed and prepared for combat. Among them, Hontar stepped forward. He looked directly at Rigger, his expression serious. "Are you ready?" he asked firmly. Rigger didn't hesitate. He sheathed his sword, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Always." Hunter's lips curved into a faint, proud smile. He raised an arm, signaling the warriors around him. "Let's see what you're capable of." Her master moved away so as not to be caught in the crossfire. Rigger took the first step and vanished. The ground beneath him cracked as a shockwave rippled through the clearing. He reappeared in the midst of the warriors like a bolt of lightning, moving too quickly for the naked eye to follow. Within seconds, four warriors bore deep cuts across their bodies. The remaining fighters quickly adjusted, converging on him from multiple angles. Rigger's speed, amplified by Flash Step, allowed him to dodge their attacks and strike before they could react. One warrior swung a massive axe at him, but Rigger effortlessly evaded, delivering a sidekick that sent the opponent flying. He leapt back, conjuring a platform of earthen walls around him to shield against stray arrows. "Hold the formation," a veteran shouted. The warriors advanced in groups, attempting to use their numbers to their advantage. Rigger, however, didn't give them the chance to organize. He summoned earth pillars beneath their feet, throwing them off balance or forcing them to dodge, then followed up with a flame slice, sending a wave of fire that burned everything in its path. Three warriors attacked simultaneously, but Rigger met them head-on. Wielding the longsword of light, he dispatched them effortlessly. As Rigger pressed forward, one of his strikes cut too deeply into a warrior. Even amidst the heat of battle, Rigger didn't hesitate. Extending his hand, a soft glow radiated from his palm, healing the warrior's wound. "Rest easy," Rigger said as the healing spell took effect. The man's eyes widened in astonishment as relief washed over him. Rigger offered a small smile before vanishing once more into the fray. He wasn't sure if it was because he had reached the saint rank or because the challenge felt trivial, but his instincts had become a formidable weapon. If he relied solely on magic, he believed he could overwhelm the entire tribe alone, let alone a single division. This allowed him the luxury of holding back. The last 10 warriors closed in together, forming a circle around Rigger. For a brief moment, he stood still, closing his eyes. When they launched their attack, his eyes snapped open, and he vanished again, moving with surgical precision. Combining swift strikes and calculated spells, Rigger systematically brought down each opponent. He ended the bout with a gust of wind that sent the final two crashing to the ground, concluding the sparring session. As the last warrior fell, Rigger stood at the center of the clearing. He began healing the more seriously injured fighters using magic. The warriors rose gradually, exchanging glances filled with admiration. Hantar was the first to approach him. "You've surpassed everyone here, Rigger. But don't let that make you complacent. There are plenty out there who can match your skill. Never overestimate yourself." Before Rigger could respond, another voice chimed in. "Even if that's true, I doubt many could rival him." It was Eleonora, the instructor of the water god style. "Idar will accompany you on your journey and deliver another of my grandchildren to your uncles after you purchase him," Eleonora declared. "I hope you'll consider keeping him with you afterward. He's talented, nearly at the saint rank, and only 15. Idar grumbled, "Whether I go with him or not, I can travel to the Azura Kingdom on my own." Rigger nodded. "I'm still at the intermediate level in the water god style, so having someone to train with will be beneficial. If our paths align, we'll journey together." Idar seemed far less arrogant than when he had first arrived. Though not unpleasant company, Rigger wouldn't mind traveling with him. Moments later, Taze appeared in the clearing, bringing news. "Rigger, the selected warriors are ready to depart. They're waiting for your confirmation." Rigger glanced around at Hantar and Verdia. Each of them watched him with a mix of pride and expectation. Taking a deep breath, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. After all, he had chosen this path, and he would see it through to the end. Rigger walked toward his home, the weight of the approaching farewell settling over him. The path was familiar, yet it felt as if he were treading it as a stranger. Warriors and villagers from the tribe greeted him as he passed, their gazes respectful and their nods solemn. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. When he reached his home, the familiar warmth welcomed him, yet something felt different in the air. His mother stood at the door, her expression a mixture of seriousness and tenderness, as if she were preparing to say something important. "Rigger," she called, her voice low and calm. "We need to talk." He frowned, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. Something in her tone quickened his heartbeat. "Of course, mother. What's wrong?" She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. He followed her, noticing the unusual silence inside the house. She led him to the center of the home, where they sat on a simple wooden bench. She sighed deeply, as though gathering the courage to speak. "I've never told you this before," she began, staring at her hands. "Because I didn't want to burden you with the weight of the past. But now, it's time for you to understand." Rigger studied her closely, worry etched across his face. She seemed more tense than he'd ever seen her, a rare sight that unnerved him. "What happened, mother?" She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "When I was a slave, I gave birth to a child. But shortly after he was born, he was taken from me. I only saw him once as an infant, and I never learned what became of him. The warriors of the tribe, including Hantar, killed those responsible when they rescued me, but my son never returned." Her words fell like a silent bomb in Rigger's heart. He sat motionless, processing what he'd just heard. The pain in her face wasn't just sadness, but a mixture of regret and acceptance. She didn't seem to harbor overt resentment, but Rigger knew the story weighed heavily on her, unspoken and unresolved. "I'm telling you this," she continued, her voice softer now, "not so you'll seek him out, but so you'll understand. Slaves are often treated as less than trash by their masters. That's the norm, especially among humans." She paused for a moment. "I never told anyone about this except your father. It was such a distant part of my life. I had already given up on everything before I was saved. This life we have now, this wonderful life, I never expected it. Having friends to talk to, a husband to rely on, and watching a son as extraordinary as you grow up. It's almost like divine intervention. I even started to believe in the Saint of Meles for a while," she chuckled faintly before turning serious again. "But despite all of that, I don't want you to hate humans indiscriminately. Fendrel is an example that not all humans are bad. Your judgment will be your greatest guide on this journey." Rigger felt a surge of emotions, shock, sadness, and compassion. He had no idea his mother had endured such hardship. She always seemed so joyful, so strong. But now, for the first time, he could see the cracks in her armor, the fragility beneath her strength. He realized how deeply this pain had been buried within her, hidden from everyone. I didn't know, Mother, he said softly, struggling to process her story. I can't even imagine how you must feel. She nodded, her eyes with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. It's something I've never spoken about, Rigger. And I didn't want it to overshadow the life you've built here. You've always been so dedicated to the tribe, to the Legion, to our future. It's only because of the path you've chosen that I felt it was time to share this with you. He sat in thoughtful silence, reflecting on her words. He thought of his lost brother, who might still be out there, a slave since birth, robbed of any chance to grow and live freely. A deep sense of loss consumed him, along with a rising anger. I don't care if it's the norm, Rigger said firmly. Norms are made by people. And if they can create them, others can change them. His mother looked at him, a mix of pride and sorrow in her gaze. You're right, Rigger. I know that. And I know you'll make a difference. All I hope is that you remember, you can always count on your family. You will always have a home to return to. He took a deep breath, determination radiating from him. I'll remember that, Mother. Always. That's a promise. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. Then, Rigger rose, his resolve clear in his expression. I'll go to the sanctuary of the sword, and the Iron Legion will leave its mark wherever I go. His mother smiled, a bittersweet smile full of pride. I know you're ready, my son. Go and fulfill your destiny. And know that, no matter what happens, you have my blessing. The next day, she saw him leave to learn king and saint level magic, her heart full of pride and hope. Rigger was prepared to face the future, not just as the leader of the Iron Legion, but as someone determined to reshape the world's rules. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with every step, he felt closer to achieving the change he envisioned. Outside, Verdia waited. Shall we go, young Rigger? Yes, he replied, more to himself than to his master. I'm ready. Verdia Solarion Age, plus 500 years mana reserves, king-level magical skills, fire magic, advanced earth magic, king water magic, saint wind magic, king healing magic, advanced detoxification magic, advanced barrier magic, advanced combat skills, North God style, Elementa bow and arrow, advanced battle strength, saint-level warrior. Depending on the distance, it can kill a king. Intellectual skills, reading and writing in beast god, demon god, fighter god and human languages. Mathematics, basic. Arithmetic, practical skills, excellent hunter, excellent teacher, excellent cook, excellent seamstress, excellent alchemist, excellent enchantress, excellent singer, excellent dancer and many other skills. Rigger ran alongside Verdia, both of them in a comfortable silence. The air of the great forest was filled with the soft sounds of nature, but neither seemed inclined to break the moment. For Rigger, each step on this journey felt like a quiet farewell. He glanced at his master, mentally recording every detail of her confident posture, the lightness with which she moved, and even the way the breeze swayed her hair. The hill they were seeking was farther than Rigger had ever gone before. They climbed a slope, reaching a large hill. When they reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The vastness of the great forest stretched as far as the eye could see, with the blue sky blending into the horizon. Verdia broke the silence. This is the perfect place to test what you've learned. As you've already learned, this Earth King level magic can cause some irreversible damage if you're not careful. Rigger nodded, taking a deep breath and letting the scenery fill his senses. Verdia looked at him with a firm, encouraging gaze. Let's start with Cumulonimbus. The Water Saint level magic. As I mentioned, this magic can be transformed into the king level magic, Thunderbolt. Just like how the tornado can turn into a hurricane. I will demonstrate it once. Pay close attention. She then began the chant, Great Spirit of Water and Imperial Prince of Lightning who ascends to the heavens, grant my wish and bring forth a wild blessing. Show your power to insignificant beings. Astonish with a strike of your divine hammer on the anvil, and cover the earth with water. Rain. Sweep everything else and expel all. Cumulonimbus. The clouds rose quickly, forming dark towers that seemed to touch the sky. The air grew thick, and a cold wind swept across the field, carrying leaves and dust. Lightning pulsed within the clouds, illuminating their outlines like glowing veins. The rain started suddenly, heavy and relentless, transforming the previously calm forest into a tempestuous chaos. Thunder roared like a primordial warning, and the strength of the storm felt overwhelming. Verdia maintained the magic for 1 minute before gradually dissipating it. "Your turn, little Rigger, go ahead." Rigger closed his eyes, letting his mind connect to the mana flowing around him. He began to recite the chant Verdia had taught him. "Great Spirit of Water and Imperial Prince of Lightning who ascends to the heavens, grant my wish and bring forth a wild blessing. Show your power to insignificant beings. Astonish with a strike of your divine hammer on the anvil, and cover the earth with water. Rain. Sweep everything else and expel all. Cumulonimbus." As he recited, he felt the mana around him stir, as if the air carried a heavy energy. He opened his eyes and saw clouds beginning to form above. The sky, once clear, began to darken. The wind picked up, and he felt the humidity in the air condensing as the clouds gathered. Rigger extended his hand to direct the flow of magic. The feeling was powerful and overwhelming, like trying to control a wild beast. Lightning flashed within the growing cloud, and raindrops began to fall. He closed his eyes again, feeling each drop, each gust of wind, and the pulsing of the lightning inside the cloud. Slowly, the storm began to respond to his command. He shaped the clouds into a large whirlpool, controlling the reach and intensity. As the magic raged above, Rigger felt the mana pulse around him, a dance between water, wind, and electricity. He closed his eyes, trying to understand the flow of the magic. Focusing on the lightning, he extended his hand, guiding one with effort. For a moment, he managed to shape its trajectory, feeling the electricity vibrate through his body. But the energy was untamable. When he tried to stabilize it, the lightning dissipated in an explosion, vanishing into the cumulonimbus. He breathed deeply, frustrated. "I neglected to control the water magic," he thought, acknowledging his failure. Still, he didn't let himself be discouraged. He had learned the saint-level magic and could try again whenever he wanted in the future. After receiving his master's approval, he dissipated the magic, a bit disappointed. When the magic finally dissipated, Verdia smiled. "Very well, Rigger. You have mastered cumulonimbus. You can now consider yourself a water saint-level mage." Rigger sighed, a mix of relief and complaint for not achieving what he wanted. He had always trained less on water magic because the immediate usefulness of his other magics was much greater. His logic was simple: what hurts more, a stone cannon or a water cannon? He looked at the clouds slowly dissipating in the sky and then turned to his master. "Earth magic now?" "Yes, but let's wait a bit. Casting a saint-level and king-level magic consecutively is my mana limit." After a brief pause, Verdia led Rigger to the next challenge. "Now, let's move to the Earth King level magic, Earth Rift. This is a powerful magic, and the most devastating magic I know. I tried to learn the superior version of it 400 years ago, but I didn't have enough mana. The next level is the Emperor level magic, Earthquake. I don't know if you'll be able to use it right away, but I recommend not testing it here. It could be dangerous." She then recited the chant clearly. "O spirits of the eternal earth, hear my call. I invoke the power of the deep heart of the world. May the primordial forces that sustain mountains and valleys awaken at my command. Split the foundations of creation, unleash your unyielding roar, and may your fury carve the earth beneath my feet. O ancestral spirit who dwells in the depths, show your immeasurable strength and reveal the hidden abyss. May those who dare challenge your stillness tremble before your unwavering power. Let the earth open and the hidden truth come to light. I command you, spirit of stone, king of the unfathomable depths. To you I call, Earth Rift." With the final cry, the world seemed to hold its breath for a moment before exploding in a terrifying spectacle. The ground opened up into an immense abyss, a crack that seemed endless. The earth roared violently, echoing through the forest like the roar of a colossal beast. Rocks shattered, dust was thrown into the air in a suffocating cloud, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. When the earth finally settled, silence reigned again. Before them, an impressive rift crossed the clearing, its depth and width so vast that it seemed impossible that something like this could have been created by mortal hands. Verdia appeared somewhat exhausted after using the 2 spells. She said, "Go ahead, use your magic alongside mine, or else you could damage the forest." "Okay, master." Rigger then closed his eyes, connecting to the mana, but this time to the earth beneath his feet. He recited the incantation, O spirits of the eternal earth, hear my call. I invoke the power of the world's deep heart. May the primordial forces that support mountains and valleys awaken at my command. Split the foundations of creation, release your relentless roar, and let your fury carve the earth beneath my feet. O ancestral spirit dwelling in the depths, show your immeasurable strength and unveil the hidden abyss. Let those who dare challenge your stillness tremble before your unshakable power. Let the earth open and the hidden truth come to light. I command you, spirit of stone, king of unfathomable depths. To you I call, Earth Fisher. Feeling the power accumulating, the earth began to tremble lightly, as if responding to the call. Suddenly, he felt something different. It was as if his consciousness stretched beyond the surface, reaching deep layers of the earth. He could feel the subsoil very deeply, the heat and pressure hidden beneath his feet. It was an overwhelming feeling, but also exhilarating. Carefully, he channeled the power to create a controlled rift. The ground before him split in a straight, deep, and well-defined line. But at the same time, Rigger realized the destructive potential of that magic. He felt he could go deeper, manipulate the tectonic plates, and replicate something close to an earthquake. He hesitated. He felt this magic was within his reach. The temptation to test this absolute power was there, but responsibility spoke louder. If something went wrong, the great forest could be devastated. He interrupted the flow of mana and observed the results of his magic cautiously. Verdia stepped forward. By the hesitation on your face, I can see you could have used the earthquake, couldn't you? Yes, I think so. I'll have to find a more desolate place to test it one day, he replied resignedly. She smiled, proud. In terms of magical ranking, there's nothing more I can teach you. It's been 5 years of learning with some breaks, but I can safely say you're the most talented disciple I've ever taught. Rigger smiled back, but the moment was bittersweet. He knew that this milestone also meant the end of his time with her as his master. The farewell was getting closer. Rigger and Verdia returned to the village, talking about the possibilities of magic. She advised him to go to the dwarves' territory to embed a magic stone into his sword, Tsukikage, saying that a better focus for spellcasting would greatly improve his magic. The weight of the moment hung between them, but neither needed to speak of it for the other to understand. As they approached the tribe, he saw the crowd gathered. Much of the tribe was there, waiting to say goodbye to one of their own, a young man whose strength and determination had inspired many, but who would now follow his own path. Rigger felt a wave of emotions seeing everyone together. He hadn't expected so many people to come to say farewell. Children looked on with admiration, adults with respect, and some with concern. He walked toward his family, where the most important members of the tribe were also waiting for him. His father, Hantar, was the first to approach. His usual serious posture showed no signs of weakness, but Rigger could see a hint of pride in his eyes. Hantar pulled him into a rare embrace. Don't forget where you came from, Rigger. Whatever you find out there, carry the name of the Doldia tribe with honor. Rigger nodded, returning the embrace. I promise, father. His mother, Celine, came next. She couldn't hold back her tears as she hugged him tightly. Take care of yourself, my son. The world out there is dangerous, even though you're strong. She gently stroked his hair. I'll be back soon, it'll only be a few years. As Celine stepped back, Guise approached with his characteristic scowl. He crossed his arms, looking bothered. I hope you know what you're doing, kid. It's not just you who will be in danger. Everything you do out there will reflect on our tribe. Be careful who you make enemies with. Rigger kept his calm in the face of the harsh words. I understand, Guise. I'll be careful. Guise grumbled something inaudible and walked away. Then Gustav, the tribe leader, approached with a slight smile. He placed a hand on Rigger's shoulder. You've got a long journey ahead. No matter the challenges you encounter, remember that we'll always welcome you back. Rigger bowed his head in gratitude. Thank you, sir. Killian was next. He turned to the Legion warriors behind him and shouted, Legion. All the warriors kneeled on one knee and responded in unison, at your command. Rigger was shocked. He had never taught them that. Was it Killian? Where did he get this idea from? Was it from the stories I told him? Rigger smiled awkwardly, still feeling good about it, though he couldn't deny it. Killian turned and spoke, We'll give our best to live up to your expectations, leader. I expect a lot from all of you. Surprise me, he said, thinking that he didn't need to say much more than that. Almost all members of the beast races respected the strong, and if they chose to follow him for his strength, he would give them a purpose. Lysena was watching him from a distance, holding back tears. She had tried to convince him many times to take her with him, but he had refused over and over again. She was still just a 7-year-old child, innocent and immature, and not strong enough. He knew it would hurt her, but this wouldn't exactly be an easy journey. Many things could go wrong. Soon, 2 small girls, Linnea and Persina, appeared. Both stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, their tails drooping sadly, showing the mix of sadness and anger they felt. You're so cold-hearted, Chief. Heartless. You're abandoning your best students. Linnea complained. How can you leave like this? Persina added, still chewing on a piece of meat despite her sadness. Rigger gave a faint smile and leaned down to meet their gaze. Don't let this distract you. Keep training hard. Listen to Gustav and Killian. I want to see both of you stronger when I return. Linnea pouted but nodded. Persina wiped her stubborn tears with her sleeve. They hugged him, trying to hold back their sadness as Rigger gently patted their heads. The circle of goodbyes seemed to be finally coming to an end. Rigger turned to Verdia, who had silently watched everything unfold. Ready. Rigger looked around once more, taking in the faces that would now be part of his memories. He took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility mixing with the emotion of departure. Yes. Rigger walked to the outskirts of the tribe, where the 30 warriors who would accompany him were gathered. They were lined up in groups of 10, their weapons at the ready. The group included experienced veterans like Kabar, a warrior with over 30 years of experience, and young hopefuls ready to prove their worth. The supplies were carefully packed into large backpacks, enough food for weeks, medicinal herbs, and water reserves. Taze was at the center of the bustle, checking everything for the 3rd time. He looked up at Rigger when he arrived and nodded. Everything's ready, Chief, Taze said, his face serious. Despite being only 11 or 12 years old, Taze had grown quickly, already standing at 1.60 meters. He would likely be very tall in the future. Rigger felt a sense of anticipation and pride as he looked at them. He scanned each of the warriors, studying their expressions. There was determination, but also anxiety. Some whispered to each other, exchanging words of encouragement. Others were silent, focused on what lay ahead. Do you trust me? Rigger asked, his voice firm. Yes, the group responded in unison, their voices echoing through the forest. Rigger nodded and walked to the front of the group. He stopped, took a deep breath, and then began to speak. This is a journey that will mark our lives. We will be pioneers, explorers who will forge paths for our tribe. What we do here will not only be for us, but for all who come after. The world out there is vast, filled with dangers and opportunities. It won't be easy, but together, we are stronger. Remember this, no matter what we face, we will triumph. The warriors' eyes shone with renewed determination, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. As Rigger finished speaking, something caught his attention from across the path. Verdia was there, dressed for travel, with a small backpack on her back. He walked over to her, surprised. You're leaving too? She smiled softly, crossing her arms. I'm heading back to the Elven village. I've said my goodbyes to everyone. I'll spend the next few years resting there. If you return, come find me. I might lose track of time. Rigger fell silent for a moment. He felt that this was his last chance to say what he felt to his master. He didn't consider himself worthy. His master had lived for hundreds of years and had never found someone. Why would he be the one chosen? But he wasn't willing to give up just because of a few setbacks. He might be a child now, but beast races lived long lives. He could take his time to win her over. For now, he would take the first step. Master, what would someone have to do to win your heart? The question caught Verdia off guard, but she laughed, a light sound that seemed to dance in the air. That's a tough question. She said thoughtfully. I don't think it's something anyone can force. Destiny is the one who dictates such things. We don't choose who we fall in love with. She paused, her gaze drifting to the blue sky. But if I had to say something, I've traveled to many places, mountains, deserts, cities, and forests. but I've never had the chance to fly freely in the skies or explore the depths of the seas. After all my travels, those dreams remain unfulfilled. Whoever could achieve that would surely earn a few points." Rigger smiled. He knew her comment wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. A chance, that's all he needed. Those words were etched in his mind. He tilted his head in respect, a gesture that spoke more than words ever could. "Then, until we meet again, Master," he said. "Until then." "Rigger," Verdia replied. They exchanged one last look, and Verdia turned, leaping nimbly through the trees. Rigger then returned to the waiting group. Taze raised his hand, signaling the warriors to prepare. Rigger looked to the horizon, his heart pounding with anticipation. He took the first step, followed by the 30 warriors. Their destination was the port city of Zant. The future was full of uncertainties, but Rigger was ready. In the middle of a clearing shaded by dense trees, Rigger watched intently as his group faced a pack of leaf tigers. These rank B monsters were known for their ferocity and tendency to hunt in groups. However, his companions were making progress. Taze and Kidder, the most experienced warrior, led the charge. Idar and Taze moved in sync, keeping the tigers at bay with precise strikes and elemental magic. Kidder stood tall and muscular, his bronze skin crossed by scars, with feline ears twitching at the slightest sound. His piercing red eyes matched his short graying hair, emphasizing his beast-like heritage. Most male members of the Adoldia and Dodoldia races didn't wear shirts, and Taze had embraced this trend. Rigger, however, decided to keep his on for now, planning to follow suit when he was older. Perched on a tree branch, Rigger analyzed the battle. His golden, magically enhanced eyes gleamed like a predator's. A subtle movement in the underbrush caught his attention. A leaf tiger, braver than the rest, creeping toward him, thinking it could take him by surprise. The moment the tiger leapt, Rigger was ready. With a fluid motion, he dodged, letting the creature brush past him. A faint glow ran along his arm as he concentrated his tuki with precision, channeling the energy into his right fist before striking the beast's side. The impact was devastating. A sharp sound echoed through the clearing as the tiger was hurled away like a cannonball. The sickening crunch of breaking bones and crushing flesh was immediate. Rigger stood still, critically observing the now motionless creature. "Still not good enough," he muttered, flexing his fingers. Tuki control was a skill he had been honing tirelessly. Inspired by Tsunade's chakra-enhanced strikes, he sought to replicate a similar effect. So far, he had managed to slightly amplify his strikes, making them marginally more powerful. The process, however, was risky. A mistake in channeling could cause the energy to recoil, inflicting serious internal damage. He allowed himself to experiment only because of his healing magic. "Maybe that's why no one does this," he pondered. "The risk is too high. But if I can achieve perfect control, this could be viable." The idea of transforming Tuki into more than just a defensive layer or raw amplifier was challenging, but he was determined. This was just one of the many concepts simmering in his mind, now that he could consciously manipulate the energy. He was also eager to explore new boundaries in magic. Lightning magic, with its speed and lethality, was a priority on his list. He was currently improving his water magic to complement this, and felt success was within reach. Another concept intrigued him deeply: the relationship between the mana within his body and the ambient mana. He noticed no fundamental difference between the two, which raised an intriguing question. Could Tuki be imbued with elemental or even healing properties? The possibilities were tantalizing. Earth element Tuki could bolster his defense, making him nearly impenetrable. Wind element Tuki could push his speed to absurd levels. The idea was promising but far too complex for now. He needed more practice and control. Recently, Rigger realized that every technique he wanted to master demanded a higher level of control, whether in magic or Tuki. The only way to improve was through relentless, grueling practice. After years of this routine, he had grown accustomed to the exhaustion, though it never became easier. Determined to tackle the simpler challenges first, he decided to master lightning magic and refine his Tuki impact technique. His thoughts were interrupted by a crimson flash. Taze, wielding a flame-cloaked blade, delivered the final blow, decapitating the last leaf tiger. The boy turned to Rigger, wiping sweat from his brow. "Boss, we're done here." Rigger nodded slightly, stepping down from the tree branch to join the group. "Good work," he said, casting an evaluating gaze over them. Kidder maintained a serious expression, though Rigger noticed the fatigue in his eyes. Idar seemed more at ease, even smiling, while Taze sheathed his blade with a hint of pride. Rigger sharpened his senses, which had reached unimaginable levels. He could faintly hear the murmur of distant conversations and detect the scent of spices and salt carried by the wind. Though he couldn't pinpoint the exact distance, he knew it was still far away. We're almost out of the great forest. Another day, and we should reach Zant Port, Rigger announced, gauging the reactions of his companions. He could sense the tension among them. And what's the plan once we get there? Idar asked, tilting his head curiously. Rigger crossed his arms, methodically outlining the next steps. Only Kidder, Taze, Idar, and I will enter the city initially. We need to find a base of operations and gather intelligence. The rest will stay outside for now, at least until we've secured a solid plan. The others nodded, understanding the need for caution. Zant Port was a hotbed of illicit activity. Smugglers, mercenaries, and slave traders operated freely there, making a careless approach potentially disastrous. Idar, your brother is in Militian. We have some business to attend to here first, and it might draw attention. You don't have to get involved if you don't want to. Idar thought for a moment before replying, I'll help. I'm already on your side anyway. Besides, you're going to save my brother. Sitting on the fence wouldn't feel right. Rigger nodded and continued, everyone else already knows this, but I'll tell you, on this journey, I plan to attack the slave traders' main base in Zant Port. Idar looked shocked, glancing at the warriors around him and realizing it wasn't a joke. After a moment, he seemed to reach a decision. Fine, but my identity can't be exposed. I don't want to implicate my brother or grandmother in this. Rigger agreed, his gaze shifting to the horizon, where the sunlight hinted at the forest's edge. It was a significant milestone, the start of a new chapter. Clenching his fists, his mind raced with ideas and possibilities. But he knew he needed to focus. Every step from now on required careful planning and skill. While the group reorganized to resume their march, Rigger felt a familiar weight on his shoulders. Leadership meant bearing everyone's expectations. He knew he couldn't afford to fail. These warriors' lives were in his hands. The gates of Zant Port were simple, made of reinforced wood and dark iron, marked by years of wear and tear. 2 guards armed with swords stood on either side of the entrance. Their sharp eyes immediately turned to the approaching group, lingering on the necks of Rigger, Taze, and Kidder. Rigger felt the sting of their suspicious gazes. In port cities like this, it was common practice to check for slave markings on newcomers' necks, and anyone from the Great Forest naturally drew suspicion. As they drew closer, one of the guards stepped forward. He was a burly man with an unkempt beard and eyes as sharp as a vulture's. Ignoring Rigger and the others, his attention zeroed in on Idar, the only human among them. What brings you to Zant Port? The guard asked, his tone full of distrust. Before Idar could answer, Rigger stepped in, his voice firm but polite. We're just passing through, he replied. The guard raised an eyebrow, scanning Rigger from head to toe with thinly veiled disdain. Humph. He muttered something inaudible, then gestured for them to pass. Rigger clenched his fists, resisting the urge to teach the man a lesson in respect. Discrimination was nothing new, he'd been warned about it countless times. Still, knowing didn't make it any less infuriating. The thought that he could flatten this entire city if he wanted, yet these people dared to disrespect him, only stoked his irritation. Taking a deep breath, he focused on the task at hand. Once inside, the city revealed its vibrant, bustling nature, especially in the early morning. Stone-paved streets bustled with hurried townsfolk, merchants setting up their stalls, and workers hauling crates of goods. The salty tang of the sea filled the air, mingling with scents of fresh fish, citrus fruits, and exotic spices. It's lively, at least, Idar remarked, looking around. Too lively, Taze muttered, frowning as he noticed the sidelong glances directed at them. Rigger noticed, as well. Most people ignored them, but some stares were more intense, laden with disdain. It wasn't unusual for city dwellers to view beastfolk as inferior or savage. As they walked, a scene unfolded that caught everyone's attention. In front of a stall, a burly man held a dwarven child by the collar. She couldn't have been older than 5, her face smeared with dirt and her eyes brimming with fear. How dare you break that? The man bellowed, slapping her across the face. The girl fell to the ground, whimpering, as the merchant raised his foot to kick her. Bastard! Taze growled, his eyes blazing with fury as he stepped forward. Taze, stop! Rigger ordered, his voice low and commanding. He felt his own anger burning, but he knew they couldn't act impulsively. Before he could say more, Kidder intervened. You need to stay calm. Drawing attention to ourselves now would jeopardize everything. Our priority is gathering information, not ruining our chances because of momentary rage. Kidder's tone was cold, but Rigger knew he was right. Verdia had warned them. They'd only get one shot at catching their enemies off guard. After that, the slavers would scatter and hide, making it impossible to strike effectively. Taze hesitated but reluctantly stepped back, his hands trembling with anger. Rigger turned his gaze away from the scene, swallowing his fury, and led the group onward. The surroundings began to change as they walked. The makeshift stalls and simple homes gave way to more refined buildings with well-maintained facades and wider streets. The contrast was striking. The city center, Rigger observed. Eventually, they arrived at a modest but well-located inn. Rigger led the way inside and approached the counter. A young, lanky attendant with messy hair greeted them with a bored expression. We need accommodations for 30 people, Rigger stated directly. The attendant glanced up, his eyes filled with disdain as they swept over the group. What are the animals from the great forest doing here? He sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Rigger's hand instinctively moved towards the hilt of his sword, and he took a step forward. He felt that he would have to impose some fear to get even the slightest bit of cooperation from these guys. Before he could respond, a deep voice interrupted. Shut your insolent mouth, boy. An older, overweight man in expensive clothing and adorned with rings emerged from the back. He slapped the attendant aside and turned to the group with a forced smile. Apologies for this fool. He doesn't know what he's saying, the man said. His eyes flicked to the sword at Rigger's side, and his expression softened. We have space for your group. You're most welcome here. Rigger relaxed slightly, but kept his tone measured. Thank you. Now, about information. We need to get up to speed on what's happening in the city. Do you know where we can find what we're looking for? The older man smiled warmly, though his cautious eyes betrayed his calculating nature. There's no need to look far. I can provide the information you need. With all the merchants and sailors passing through, I'm always well informed. Rigger narrowed his eyes, studying the man. He seemed genuine, but there was an unmistakable air of opportunism about him. In Zant Port, information was clearly a commodity. Of course, my services don't come cheap, the man added with a sly grin. Fine, Rigger replied curtly. Let's get settled first, then we'll talk. The tribe had entrusted him with some funds for this journey, but he knew resources were limited. He'd have to ensure any information was worth the cost. Once they'd been assigned their room keys and the group began settling in, Rigger turned to Idar. Idar, rent 2 of those covered wagons we saw on the way in. Go with Kidder to retrieve the rest of our group from the forest. Use the western gate, it's for merchants, and the guards don't check it thoroughly. Understood, Idar replied, leaving to inform Kidder. The 2 departed shortly after. Taze, stay here and wait for the others. I'll scout the city. With that, Rigger moved to a window in his room, opened it, and leapt out, disappearing into the bustling streets below. The port city of Zant was a chaotic blend of sounds, smells, and constant movement. The main streets were filled with merchants shouting to advertise their wares, while sailors, adventurers, and common citizens moved amidst the unrelenting noise. Rigger walked among them, staying alert, his eyes scanning every detail around him. He had ventured out because he felt the need to understand the environment, prices, and people, as well as to gather useful information for his mission. It had been a long time since he had interacted in human society, and his opinion of the humans in this world wasn't very positive. This was largely due to the many slavers he had faced and the stories Verdia and his mother had told him. However, Fendrel had made him believe that there might be better humans out there. As he passed through an open market, he noticed a stall apparently selling paper and maps. The vendor, a thin man with graying hair and a tired expression, was engrossed in a book as Rigger approached. The man glanced at him without much interest, seemingly unfazed by the fact that Rigger was a young member of the beast race. Stepping closer, Rigger asked, "Hello, do you have any maps of the city available?" I've got two, one detailed and one simple, the vendor replied indifferently, pointing at two stacks of seemingly hand-drawn maps. Rigger examined the maps. One cost 2 mealy silver coins, while the other was 5. He wasn't sure if this was expensive for a map, but it felt a bit pricey. If you can't read, the simple one is 2 silver coins, and the detailed one is 5, the vendor said, his tone uninterested as he returned to his book. All right, I'll take the detailed one. Rigger replied, thinking at least this man wasn't trying to scam him. He retrieved the coins from his pouch and handed them over. Thanks for your purchase. If you find any important landmarks in the city not shown on the map, let me know. If I find it worth noting, I'll give you a silver coin, the vendor said in a slow, dragging tone as he handed Rigger the map. Examining the map, Rigger assessed its utility. It was rudimentary but detailed enough to show key points such as the port, commercial areas, and several main streets. This will do for now, he thought. As he walked away, his thoughts drifted to the funds his tribe had provided him. 30 mealy's gold coins and 50 mealy's silver coins. In the Dodoldia tribe, such money was practically useless since they lived off hunting and direct bartering. The amount was sufficient to establish themselves for a few days and purchase supplies for the journey to Malishan. Still, Rigger knew he had to be careful with his expenses. He continued exploring, observing workers, adventurers, and the slaves laboring in the streets. Some were human, others beast races, and even some of demonic origin. Nobody seemed particularly disturbed by this. Even some slaves didn't look particularly sad or despondent. He already knew that abolishing slavery in this world would be an incredibly difficult task. Many slaves were captured during raids on tribes, villages, or caravans. However, there were also those who sold themselves into slavery after incurring debts they couldn't repay, willingly accepting servitude for a set period. There were also those enslaved as punishment for crimes, prisoners of war who had to choose between death or servitude, and even orphans who sold themselves for food, shelter, and protection. These and other reasons made such moral rules deeply ingrained in the societies of this world. Changing it would take generations. He wasn't that interested in all this work and didn't think it was necessary for now. Maybe if the opportunity arose he would try something. Of course, most slaves were still obtained through kidnappings and attacks, particularly targeting beastly tribes and isolated villages. But Rigger already had a plan to address this. It was simpler than he had imagined. Why were demonic races far less enslaved than beast races? There might be other reasons, but he was convinced that much of it was due to the powerful demon kings ruling each province. Few dared to invade their territories to capture slaves. It had been the same during the era of the second beast god, Geiger. And that was exactly what he intended to replicate. According to his master and Gustav, he was already considered a force to be reckoned with on a global scale. His ability to cast king-tier spells without incantations and his standing as a saint-level warrior were massive deterrents. He just needed an opportunity to showcase this power. If he succeeded, even the major underworld powers would hesitate to act against the Great Forest for fear of the potential damage he could inflict. Of course, this wouldn't yield instant results, but it would be a significant first step. The Iron Legion would closely follow his lead, paving the way he opened. The people's gazes varied as he walked. Some ignored him completely, treating him as just another passerby. Others glared at him with disdain or hostility. He noticed that much of the animosity came from well-dressed individuals or those in positions of authority. Ignorant people will always exist, he thought to himself. Reaching the port, Rigger paused to observe the sea. The salty breeze brought a wave of nostalgia. He remembered his past life and the beaches he had visited. It was his first time seeing the sea in this world. Boats of various sizes were anchored, with crews busily loading and unloading cargo. He approached a burly man with a thick beard who seemed approachable. "Hello, could you tell me how much a trip to the demon continent costs?" Rigger asked. The man looked him over before answering. "Depends. A simple trip with no guarantees would cost about 10 silver coins. Want luxury, protection, or speed? The price goes up." Rigger nodded, thanking the man for the information, and began heading back toward the inn. As he walked, he sensed something odd. He had noticed he was being watched since leaving the port, and now he was certain. His keen instincts picked up subtle movements, footsteps that stopped whenever he turned around. "I'm being followed," he thought, remaining calm. He made his way toward a more isolated area, filled with narrow alleys and deserted streets. If they were hostile, he would deal with it there. The footsteps continued, keeping a cautious distance. Rigger breathed deeply, his beast-like ears picking up every sound around him. He walked unhurriedly, his eyes scanning the worn walls of the alley and the debris scattered on the ground. When he finally reached a point where the noise of the bustling streets disappeared, he stopped. Perfect, he thought. For a few seconds, only the wind passed through the narrow alley. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind him. Before he could fully turn, a shadow lunged forward, and a blade of iron gleamed as it descended toward his back. Rigger moved with precision. He raised his left hand, gripping the blade firmly. The metal didn't even cut his skin. The attacker, a rough-looking man in tattered clothing, widened his eyes in shock. "What?" the man stammered, trying to pull the blade back. Before he could react further, Rigger murmured something under his breath, and an invisible blade of wind sliced through the air. The man's arm was severed with surgical precision, and he collapsed to the ground, screaming in pain as he clutched the bleeding stump. The second pursuer, a few meters behind, hesitated for a moment, his uncertainty clear in his eyes. But when Rigger turned to look at him, the man spun around and started running. At least he's smart. Rigger raised his right hand slightly, and the ground ahead of the fleeing man trembled. A wall of earth emerged, blocking his path. The man struck the wall with his sword, but only sparks flew. He turned around, but before he could react, another wind blade slashed through his legs, bringing him down with a cry of agony. Rigger walked toward him calmly, ignoring the man's groans of pain. With another hand motion, he used quicksand magic to make the ground beneath the man give way, trapping him up to his neck. The earth hardened around him, forming an improvised prison. The man, terrified, began to hyperventilate. Meanwhile, the first attacker, now crawling desperately on the ground in a futile attempt to escape, was interrupted by a firm kick to the back from Rigger. The man screamed again, but before he could pass out from the pain, Rigger cast a healing spell to stop the bleeding from his severed arm. "We still have a lot to talk about." Rigger dragged the man back and placed him next to his companion, who now sat in complete silence, too terrified to scream. Both of them were visibly horrified, but Rigger paid no mind. "All right. Let's talk. If you cooperate, you leave here alive." "Understood." The two men nodded quickly, desperate. "Who do you work for?" Rigger asked, staring at the man with the severed arm. "And no one," he stammered. "We just saw a feral kid walking around. Thought it'd be easy money." Rigger narrowed his eyes. The answer made sense, but he wasn't ready to believe it so easily. "And where were you planning to sell me?" he pressed. There are lots of places in the city," the man trapped in the earth replied, his voice trembling. "Merchants, selling points, anyone would buy." "Show me," Rigger said, pointing at the man with the severed arm. "Use your finger to mark the places on the map you know. Don't even think about lying, it won't end well for you." The man hesitated for a moment, but Rigger simply stared at him in silence. Trembling, he pointed out the locations, trying to be as detailed as possible. "Good," Rigger said, storing the map away. "Now one more thing, who else is involved in this?" "We don't know. We just do small jobs. We're low-level adventurers. We don't know anything else, I swear." Rigger stayed silent, watching the two. He could smell the fear radiating from them. When he finally stood, the men sighed in relief, thinking they might actually be released. "Thanks for the cooperation." Before they could react, Rigger slit their throats with a wind blade, silencing them forever. He stared at the bodies for a moment, then used magic to bury them in the earth and harden the ground, leaving the alley clean and without traces. That should avoid any trouble for now, he thought, dusting off his hands. Without further delay, he leaped onto the nearby rooftop and began moving across the buildings, heading back to the Black Sails Tavern. The sun was already setting when Rigger reached the rooftops near the Black Sails Tavern. From there, he could see the street activity starting to wind down as workers ended their days and merchants closed their stalls. He descended nimbly from the rooftop, landing silently in a narrow alley beside the tavern. Walking toward the main entrance, he noticed the weathered wooden sign swaying in the wind, the words "Black Sails" nearly erased by time. Upon entering, he was greeted by the stuffy atmosphere and the smell of stale beer and old food. The barkeep, a wiry man with thinning hair and shifty eyes, watched him enter. There was something different in his gaze now. Perhaps fear, perhaps distrust. Either way, Rigger didn't care. He approached the counter and spoke in a firm tone. "Call the old fat man. Tell him I need to speak with him." The barkeep quickly left without another word. While he waited, Rigger scanned the room. A few regular patrons glanced at him briefly, but didn't seem inclined to start a conversation. A few minutes later, the barkeep returned and nodded. "He's waiting for you. Back room." Rigger followed the barkeep down a narrow corridor to a plain wooden door. Upon opening it, he found the old fat man seated behind a desk, his expression shifting between interest and caution. He was a corpulent man with a short, well-kept beard that contrasted with his otherwise disheveled appearance. Beside him, two armed men stood watch, their eyes fixed on Rigger. The fat man gestured to a chair on the other side of the desk. "Take a seat, boy. I don't know your name yet, and I haven't told you mine. I'm Pykak, the owner of this humble inn and tavern," he introduced himself with a proud smile. Rigger accepted the invitation and sat down. He knew this meeting could be crucial for his next steps. "I'm Rigger Adoldia. I hope it's a pleasure to meet you." Rigger sat at the tavern table, adjusting his posture on the worn-out chair as his gaze wandered across the dimly lit hall. The portly owner of the establishment, commonly referred to as Pykak, seemed perpetually observant. "I won't talk about the slave traders yet," Rigger thought, noting that the man was as much a seller of information as he might be a seller of secrets to others. Despite his confidence in his own strength, he knew he couldn't shield all of his subordinates from a potential ambush. Better to keep the conversation safe for now. "I'd like to know a little about the world in general to start," Rigger said, breaking the silence between them. Pykak frowned briefly, then shrugged and adjusted himself in his chair. "What kind of question is that, kid? The world's the same as always. Adventurers, bandits, kingdoms, and the like. What exactly are you looking to learn? I'll decide the total price for the information after we're done." Rigger had a few questions in mind. His master had told him a lot about the world, but she had also advised him to update his knowledge since everything she'd shared was at least 50 years old. His mother's knowledge was limited to their immediate surroundings. For instance, the 7 great powers. Are they still the same as they were 50 years ago? Any changes? The old man scoffed, crossing his arms. "That's a tough one. As far as I know, the only change is that the sword god's been replaced. The new guy's name is Golfarayan, and they say he's far superior to the previous one. The rest of the 7 great powers? Quiet as ever. Most of them are missing, anyway. Honestly, I wouldn't put much stock in those random rankings if I were you." Rigger nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the information. Golfarayan was the new sword god. Fendrel had left the sword sanctuary over 20 years ago, and he wasn't the sword god at the time. Rigger found himself intrigued to meet this Golfarayan someday. And the rulers? What about the kingdom of Azura? Chiron? Pykak snorted, clearly unimpressed. Azura's still Azura. Useless nobles stabbing each other in the back for power. The king's the same as 50 years ago, but he's getting old. I'd give him another 10 years before his children start tearing each other apart for the throne. For now, things are stable though. As for Chiron, I've heard the previous king was overthrown. Bit of a mess, but now his brother rules. They say the new king's got a kid blessed with phenomenal strength." Rigger asked further about the kingdoms of the central continent, from north to south. Pykak didn't know much about some of them but had basic knowledge of their rulers and situations. Rigger had to admit the old man was well informed, or perhaps it was just that he himself knew so little about the world. He made mental notes of these changes. His master had often told him, "If you want to understand a kingdom, look to its rulers." This advice, she said, was timeless. "And Mealy's? Who's the Pope now?" "Oh, he's been in charge for quite a while. Harry Grimoire, if memory serves. He's supposedly more progressive, but Mealy's is still the same. Knights with their noses in the air, intolerant as ever." Pykak spat on the floor. Rigger nodded. Mealy's was their next destination after Zant. He needed to learn about a noble named Lindstar. When he'd asked his master for the name of the boy she spared 50 years ago who was now hunting her, she could only recall his first name. "Is there a noble in Mealy's named Lindstar?" "Oh, that's specific." "Yeah, there is. Linstar Joylore of House Joylore. Mind telling me why you're asking? Paikak's curiosity was evident. That's none of your concern. Rigger continued updating himself on Meles' current authorities and nobility, then shifted the topic to the Demon Continent. Paikak didn't know much, but mentioned it was divided into provinces ruled by demon kings. He also shared a saying that drew many powerful warriors to its shores: if you seek power, travel onward. Your destination is the Demon Continent. Journey through its lands. Ascend to Necros Fortress. Before the Demon King, prove your strength and you may wish for even greater power. Only then can the power of conquest be yours. Rigger made a mental note to visit this Necros Fortress someday, though he had more immediate priorities. And what about the beastfolk swordsman who became the Sword King? Know anything about him? Paikak raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. Ah, you mean Ghislaine Didoldia, the Black Wolf? A formidable woman. They say she's the first of her kind to claim that title in a long time. Rigger froze momentarily, digesting the revelation. He'd heard many stories about Ghislaine Didoldia, most of them unflattering within his tribe. Still, he sympathized with her struggles, knowing she likely didn't have the advantage of reincarnation and had to face her instincts head-on as a child. The daughter of Gustav makes sense, he murmured, recalling the theory that stronger instincts in childhood often indicated greater talent. I need to meet her someday, he thought. At 9 years old, Rigger could already feel his instincts growing stronger daily. For now, he managed them well, but he doubted reaching the saint rank alone would suffice. Ghislaine, as a sword king, might be able to help. Do you know where she is now? Paikak shook his head. No idea. Last I heard, she was part of an S-rank adventurer group called the Black Wolffangs, but I don't know her current whereabouts. Rigger felt slightly disappointed and shifted the focus of the conversation. Tell me about the trade in magic items. Who produces them, who sells them, things like that. Paikak scratched his scruffy beard thoughtfully. Azura dominates most of the trade, but the dwarves have their specialty shops for magical weapons and items, mainly in the northern mountain regions and here in Meles. Besides them, the halflings are the real experts in magical tools. In this city, there's a decent shop near the main market. Nothing too impressive, but you might find some interesting items there from time to time. Rigger made a mental note to check out the shop later. The conversation continued for a while, with Rigger absorbing information about adventurer guilds, caravan routes, and rumors of dangerous zones in the region. He smoothly transitioned into asking about criminal factions in the city and in Meles, careful not to reveal his true interest. He managed to gather a few names, though nothing immediately actionable. Finally, he thanked the tavern keeper and paid 2 Meles gold coins. Paikak explained that most of what Rigger asked was common knowledge, with only a few pieces of exclusive information. Returning to the inn, Rigger found that the other 26 warriors had already arrived and passed through the entrance without much scrutiny. Gathering Taze, Kidder, Idar, and another warrior, whom he considered a secondary leader of the group, Rigger began a strategy meeting. The others would stay on standby while he shared his observations. Some people in this city seem indifferent to us, but others clearly aren't. He unfolded a map on the table, pointing at the marked locations. 2 adventurers tried to kidnap me, but I managed to get some information from them. Tomorrow, the 5 of us will explore some of these areas. No deep investigations or suspicious behavior. Our goal is to stay unnoticed while gathering visual and sensory information. The dominant underworld group in this area seems to be called the Black Troll. Kidder scratched his chin, studying the map. And the rest? They'll remain here, prepared for combat. Rigger paused, looking at Taze. Stay alert. 2 men have already tried to attack me. Likely because I looked like an easy target as a child, but it shows hostility. Idar is human and won't have that problem, and Kidder has the look of an experienced warrior, which should make them hesitate. Taze nodded, his expression serious. Understood. Our main goal is to identify the primary base, correct? Exactly, Kidder interjected, crossing his arms. That's why, if you find any slave outposts that aren't the main base, don't interfere. This goes for you too, Chief. Stick to the plan. The group spent some time discussing strategies before Rigger finally dismissed them. Later, alone in his room, Rigger began training his magical control, focusing on water magic. He conjured physical barriers to drain his mana, which also served as practice for his slightly weaker barrier magic. His mana reserves were already incredible. He hadn't met anyone with more mana than him so far. He suspected he had surpassed some sort of threshold recently, potentially reaching the god level in mana capacity. However, he wouldn't exhaust it entirely during this mission. It would be too risky. At least he didn't expect this operation to last long. As he worked, his thoughts wandered. We can't linger here too long. The longer we stay, the greater the chance of being noticed. Determined to wrap up the preparations in the coming days, Rigger concluded his training and rested, already planning the next day's actions. The next day arrived. Rigger and his small group set out early. The plan was simple: explore the marked points on the map, avoid drawing attention, and gather as much information as possible. Taze, Idar, Kidder, and the other warrior, Ralphur, split off from Rigger, each with a basic copy of the map. Rigger headed to the first marked location, a shop used as a front for slave trading. The shop was located on a narrow street with tightly packed buildings and small windows. Its facade was unremarkable, a heavy wooden door with a faded sign that read Port Antiques. Seems ordinary, Rigger thought, frowning as he examined the building. Rigger moved slightly away from the people walking nearby, circling the area to get a clearer view. He quietly climbed a stack of crates and positioned himself on the roof of an adjacent building, activating his mana eyes. Let's see what's hidden here, he thought. The magical vision revealed a grim scene. Behind the shop, in a partially covered area, there were several cages. Inside them, he saw human, beast, and other figures, some barely recognizable due to their deplorable state. Many were malnourished, and some had untreated open wounds. Rigger's frown deepened as he observed more closely. 5 attendants in the front, 4 poorly armed guards near the cages. Weak breathing. Some of the slaves are on the verge of death. Doesn't look like a main base, just a smaller sales point. He continued observing, looking for any sign of a subterranean entrance or anything unusual, but nothing stood out. After some time, he noted the entrances, the number of guards, and the conditions of the slaves before returning to the streets. It's exactly what it seems, a small sales point. Nothing underground, just a stockpile of slaves in the back, Rigger thought, scanning the surroundings before moving on. He blended into the bustling crowd, leaving the area. The next location on the map was in a quieter part of the city. When he arrived, Rigger noticed this point seemed even smaller than the previous one, a small rundown house with heavy curtains covering the windows. There were no obvious signs of movement, except for a faint trail of footprints in the mud leading to the entrance. Rigger activated his mana eyes again. The magical flow inside the house was almost non-existent. There was little indication of many people being present. Nothing here. Either it's empty or too insignificant to bother with, but also easy to deal with if needed. Rigger took on more locations himself, since his mana eyes sped up the process. After checking his targets, he headed to his next destination, a magic item shop recommended by Pykak. The magic item shop was vastly different from the other locations he had visited. Its facade was inviting, with a polished wooden door and display windows filled with gleaming artifacts and enchanted stones. When Rigger entered, the scent of burned wood and dried herbs filled the air, creating a mystical atmosphere. Behind the counter, a thin man with graying hair was busy adjusting a pendant on a chain. He glanced briefly at Rigger, but paid him little attention. With his mana eyes still active, Rigger quickly realized the shop was more than it seemed. Many items bore traces of advanced enchantments, and some artifacts emitted an energy unlike anything he had seen before. Interesting. Definitely something here worth a closer look, he thought. He picked up a small blue magical stone from a shelf and studied it for a moment. The magic within it felt unstable yet powerful. Returning the stone to the shelf, he took a final look around before leaving. He decided he would revisit the shop when leaving the city, once he had more time. When Rigger finally returned to the inn, he was met with an unexpected sight. Upon entering his room, he found a young dwarf boy, dirty and frightened, huddled in a corner. The boy held his knees to his chest, wide-eyed and watching Rigger warily. Taze stood beside the boy, looking slightly uneasy. He asked for help, Taze explained, raising his hands as if to fend off reprimand. He was running from someone, and there wasn't anyone else around. I thought he might be useful. Rigger approached slowly, his stern expression softening slightly. All right. If no one saw him, You did the right thing." He crouched down to the boy's level, who recoiled slightly. The boy had short red hair and looked around 4 or 5 years old. "There's no need to be afraid. We're here to help," Rigger said calmly. Rigger looked at the young dwarf in front of him. The boy still appeared shaken, his face covered in soot, and his gaze hesitant, as if he wasn't sure where he was or who he could trust. Rigger decided to earn his trust first. He crouched down to the boy's level and tried to smile, attempting to appear friendly and harmless, but it ended up looking a bit awkward. "Hey, it's all right now. You're safe." Rigger's voice was calm but carried an undertone of firmness. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his eyes diverting for a moment before answering, almost in a whisper, I don't have a name yet." Rigger raised an eyebrow, surprised. "No name? Ah, that's right. Dwarves only get names at 7 years old." The boy nodded nervously. Rigger slowly nodded. He had heard about dwarven traditions in his lessons with his mentor, but had never encountered a young dwarf to confirm it firsthand. "I see. But tell me, little one, what happened to you? And how did you escape that place?" The boy took a deep breath, still reluctant, but began to speak. It was with the help of a man who works there. One of the bosses. They called him Twin." Rigger tilted his head, intrigued. "Twin?" "Yes." The boy replied, his eyes filling with a mix of fear and hope. "He wasn't any different from the others, but last night, he came to me and took me to a place. A hidden sewer pipe, behind one of the warehouses. He told me to cross to the other side and find someone with." He hesitated, looking at Rigger with curiosity. Animal ears. Rigger was intrigued, even a little cautious. Did this twin send him to look for them because he knew who they were, or did he think they would help the boy? "And that's what you did? When you got to the other side, did you find Taze?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yes. I did what he said. When I saw the man with the ears, I asked for help. He brought me here." Rigger was silent for a moment, processing the information. A trafficker who helped slaves escape? That seemed contradictory. There was definitely more to this. He needed to speak with this man first. He looked at the boy again, this time more seriously. "Do you think you would recognize this man, Twin, if you saw him again?" The boy bit his lip, hesitating, but finally nodded. "I think so." Rigger nodded back, his mind already formulating the next steps. "Then, I need you to help me identify him. This could be the key to saving others like you." The boy's eyes widened, and he took a step back. I don't know. What if they catch me again?" Rigger placed a firm but comforting hand on his head. "I won't let that happen. Don't worry, I'm very strong." The boy looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether he could trust the promise. Finally, he gave a small nod. Rigger stood up and looked at Taze, who had been nearby, watching the interaction. "Taze, write down everything I say." Taze nodded, quickly grabbing a piece of parchment and a quill. Meanwhile, Rigger began to describe the results of his investigations that day. He described all the points he had investigated, the guards, the layout of the place, the number of employees, and all kinds of details. He paused, allowing Taze to keep up with his words. Then he continued, "If the boy is telling the truth, then this twin might be our best chance to capture someone from a higher ranks, that is, unless he himself is one of them. He seems to have access to the facilities and a motivation to help. We need to find out more about him." Kidder, who had approached during the explanation, crossed his arms and looked at Rigger. "What's the plan?" "It's simpler than we thought at first. Most of these places only have advanced warriors at best. The smaller ones only have weak guards. Maybe the leader of this group is a saint-level warrior, but it won't go beyond that." Kidder laughed and replied, "Of course, you're the anomaly here. It's not strange that there's just one saint." Rigger smiled. "Since that's the case, let's just capture a higher-ranked person who knows where their main base is and the whereabouts of most of the members, and interrogate him. After that, I'll invade and kill them all, with some of you making sure no one escapes. The others will attack other bases. Taze will lead one group and you will lead another. Idar will come with me." Rigger thought for a moment. Rigger looked at Kidder and Taze with determination. "Gather the information I've given with everything the other warriors have gathered so far. Let everyone know. I want them ready to act as soon as we have something solid. Kidder nodded, his expression serious. And you? Rigger looked at the young dwarf, who still seemed nervous but determined to help. I'll go with him. We're going to identify this trafficker and have a conversation with him. Kidder gave a small approving smile. Understood. Let's prepare. Taze continued organizing the information they had gathered. After a few minutes, Rigger checked to make sure everything was recorded before giving his final instructions. Taze, finish organizing everything and then share it with the others and Idar when he arrives. I want everyone to be aware of your group and your targets tomorrow. Taze nodded without hesitation. Yes, boss. Rigger then turned to the young dwarf, kneeling again to be at his level. Are you ready for this? The boy hesitated for a moment before nodding, his small fist clenched at his side. Despite his fear, there was a spark of courage in his eyes. Rigger smiled. Good. Let's go then. He stood up, signaling for the boy to follow him as they prepared to leave in search of the trafficker named Twin. The sun was already setting, and the city was gradually growing darker. As they walked through the streets, Rigger took the opportunity to ask the little dwarf some questions. He wanted to get to know him better, and perhaps with that, ease some of the tension in the boy. So, tell me, what do you like? Rigger asked casually, glancing at him briefly. The boy hesitated for a moment, seeming surprised by the question. What do I like? I think I like high places. Rigger raised his eyebrows, intrigued. High places. Yes. I used to live in the mountain ranges. From up there, everything looked so small. It was peaceful, and we were close to the sky. There was nostalgia and sadness in the boy's voice, and Rigger felt the weight of what he was saying. It seemed more than just a preference for landscapes. It was a memory of a place he'd probably never see again. That must have been an amazing place to live, Rigger commented, trying to keep the conversation light. The boy nodded, but his expression soon changed, becoming more somber. It was, but we had to travel to visit my father's friends. Rigger gently asked, as he believed it was good to share these kinds of things, what happened? The boy took a deep breath, as if he needed to gather strength to speak. We were traveling on the Sword Road. My parents and I. And we were attacked by bandits. Rigger looked at him attentively, noticing the effort the boy made to continue speaking. I only remember there were many of them. They surrounded us. My parents tried to fight, but... His voice faltered for a moment. They killed them. They told me it was my parents' fault for resisting, and that now I would be an orphan slave. Rigger sympathized with the boy. This was one of the main reasons he had trained and fought so hard since arriving in this world. The fate of becoming a slave was worse than death for him, and the best way to avoid it was by being strong. They threw me into a cart with other kids and brought me here. The silence between them was heavy. Rigger knew that nothing he said would erase the boy's pain. Still, he placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Your parents were brave. They did what was right, even knowing the cost. The boy looked up, surprised by Rigger's words, and then nodded slowly. Rigger continued, Don't think you shouldn't fight because your parents died doing that. On the contrary, to avoid suffering the same fate again, you need to fight. After a while, they arrived at the location Taze had indicated. It was a busy area, with people coming and going, even at that hour of the night. The lanterns illuminated the streets poorly, casting shadows that danced on the walls of the surrounding buildings. Rigger looked at the little dwarf and pointed to a more secluded corner where he could wait without being noticed. Hold on to me. I'm going to climb that building. From up there, we'll have a better view of the exit. The boy nodded obediently and held on to him. Rigger, with agile movements, climbed the building and reached the roof. From up there, he had a clear view of the entrance and exit of the establishment. He looked down, seeing the boy watching him with curiosity. Stay alert. When he shows up, let me know. The boy nodded again, but seemed nervous. Rigger decided it was a good moment to bring up another subject. You need a name, you know? The boy blinked, surprised by the sudden change of subject. A name. Yes. It's strange for me to keep calling you you, don't you think? The boy seemed to think about the idea. But I only get a name when I'm 7. Well, that's your race's tradition. But you're here now. We can give you a nickname for now. The little dwarf hesitated, but seemed intrigued. Rigger continued, in my homeland, there was a name that meant something like being red-haired. I think it suits you. How about Rufus? The boy's eyes brightened. He repeated the name, as if testing the sound of it. Rufus. I like it. Rigger smiled, satisfied. He had chosen the name casually, but it seemed to please the boy, which was the most important thing. The night went on, and they remained alert. Rufus kept his eyes fixed on the entrance of the establishment, while Rigger monitored everything from above, analyzing every movement. Finally, after some time, Rufus pointed. It's him. Rigger followed the boy's gaze and saw a man coming out the door. He had long brown hair tied in a braid and was carrying a jug of alcohol. Despite his relaxed appearance, there was something in his posture that suggested experience in combat. The man seemed to be middle-aged, and his jovial behavior contrasted with the image one might expect from someone associated with slave traders. He greeted the people around him with laughter and waves, as if he were a well-known figure in the area. Rigger swiftly descended from the building and approached the man. Are you sure? I am, Rufus answered, the conviction in his voice outweighing any hesitation. Rigger looked at the man again before lifting Rufus into his arms. All right. Let's follow him. The man walked for some time, turning several corners, as if he were simply heading home or finishing a typical night. Eventually, he entered a quieter alley, far from the curious eyes of the main street. It was the perfect moment to act. Rigger gently placed Rufus on the ground, indicating for him to stay hidden behind a pile of nearby crates. Stay here. Don't move until I come back. The boy nodded, though his eyes showed concern. Rigger silently advanced toward the man, moving with the grace of a predator. When he was close enough, he used his howling magic at short range. The powerful roar echoed through the narrow alley, completely disorienting the man. He stumbled, barely managing to grab the hilt of his sword before collapsing, stunned by the sonic impact. With agility, Rigger lifted the unconscious man over his shoulder and returned to where Rufus was waiting. Without wasting time, he scooped the boy up and began climbing the nearby buildings. Jumping from rooftop to rooftop, he kept a steady pace until he reached the tavern, where he entered discreetly through an upper window to avoid being seen. Once inside, Rigger placed Rufus on the ground. Is he going to be okay? Rufus asked, his voice filled with concern. He saved me. Rigger observed the boy for a moment before answering honestly. That depends on him. If he cooperates, there's no reason anything bad should happen. Rufus nodded slowly, still a little worried but trusting Rigger's words. The boy ran off to find Taze, and Rigger carried the unconscious man to his room. There, he called one of the warriors who had accompanied him on the mission. Tie him up. Use reinforced ropes. I don't want to take any chances. The warrior nodded and began to work, while Rigger went downstairs to check for updates on the investigation. He found Idar in the main hall, speaking with one of the warriors. When Idar saw him, he approached immediately. Idar, why did you take so long? Rigger called out. I was posing as a traveler at the guild and managed to gather some information. All right, let's talk inside. They headed back to the rooms. Okay, what do you have? Rigger asked. Idar replied, I asked some subtle questions about which organization was behind the slave trade in the city. Apparently, their main base is a little outside the city, but not too far, and it's named after their leader, who is called the Black Troll. Rigger crossed his arms, absorbing the information. Great work. This will save us some time. Did you find out anything about him? Idar thought for a moment. I think he's from a demon race, and he doesn't practice any of the 3 sword styles. He seems to use an axe to fight, and of course, he's known to be really strong. He continued, but it seems like someone else showed up recently. I couldn't get any information about the new guy, but they seem to treat him with respect. Rigger nodded, already formulating strategies in his mind. All right, we'll discuss this more later. Call Kidder. I've captured the man who freed the dwarf boy. I want to interrogate him. Idar didn't waste any time and went to find Kidder, while Rigger returned to the room where the man was being held. A few minutes later, Kidder arrived, entering the room with his imposing presence. Now, only the 3 of them remained, Rigger, Kidder, and the captured man. Rigger approached the man and shook him lightly until he began to stir. The man's eyes blinked several times before finally focusing on Rigger and Kidder. He tried to move, but the tightly bound ropes kept him in place. "What? Where am I? Who are you?" he asked, confusion clear in his voice. Rigger leaned in, crossing his arms as he looked directly at the man. "Just travelers. We hope you can help us clear up a few questions." The man blinked again, still dazed, but the tension in the air made it clear he didn't have much choice. The room was filled with a suffocating tension. Yen, bound to a chair with reinforced ropes, was sweating profusely. His eyes, though full of fear, carried a faint glint of hesitant defiance, as if he were still trying to find a way out of the situation. Rigger stood before him, arms crossed, while Kidder silently observed from the side, his hands resting on the hilt of his long sword. "Let's start with the simplest," Rigger began, his voice firm. "Who are you, and why did you save the dwarf boy?" Yen took a deep breath, looking away, but Rigger didn't leave room for hesitation. He stretched out his hand, using a controlled fire magic to burn his fingers little by little, making screams echo through the room. Then, a healing light cured the burn, making the entire nightmare feel like a dream. As you can see, this can last a long time or a short time. I'd cooperate if I were you. I have plenty of mana to burn. The prisoner, still with fear in his eyes, swallowed hard. Okay. My name is Yen. I'm one of the collectors in the trafficking network here. I help transport and sell slaves. That's what I do." Kidder clenched his fist around the hilt of his sword, his expression growing even darker. "So you admit to being a slave trader?" Yen shrank back but continued, "Yes, as for why I saved the boy. I save some of them from time to time, especially little children. I try to help when I see someone's fate is worse than death." "Explain that," Rigger ordered, narrowing his eyes. The man took a deep breath, fighting the panic. "The dwarf boy. I knew he was going to be sent to a human noble from Azura. A filthy bastard who has strange tastes when it comes to food. He's in Mealy's now on a diplomatic trip, but my superior said he wanted a young dwarf, and it was decided that he would be sent. When I heard about it, I helped the boy escape." Rigger felt extremely disgusted and repulsed when he heard what Rufus's fate would have been, as he had sympathized with the boy. He wondered how such scum managed to stay alive and prosper. He narrowed his eyes, evaluating Yan's words. "And you thought handing him over to us was a convenient solution? I heard warriors from the beast race had recently arrived in the city." Yen blurted out, his voice tinged with desperation. "I thought you might be able to protect the boy. I didn't have many quick options, did I? It was that or let him die a horrible death." Rigger fell silent, his piercing gaze fixed on Yen, analyzing every detail of his expression. He could hear his heartbeat, and his physical reactions told him that he was probably not lying. After a few seconds, he turned to Kidder. "What do you think of this?" Kidder seemed as furious as he was, but also concerned. He shook his head slowly. "If he's telling the truth, then the organization already knows we're here. That's worrying." "It's true," Rigger murmured before turning back to Yen. "What else does your organization know about us?" Yen lifted his head, sweat running down his face. "They know you're about 30. And that there's a beast boy among you who seems to be dangerous. They say he seems very strong and carries a special sword." Rigger paused for a moment. He knew that, even without meaning to, his presence drew attention. He hadn't expected to remain completely hidden, but it was good that they didn't even suspect his intentions for now. "That's not a problem," Kidder said. Rigger nodded, but kept his focus on Yen. "And what about your superiors? Where are they now?" "Their main base is outside the city center," Yen began, speaking more quickly now. "And each larger branch has a secondary leader." Rigger analyzed the situation. These were all pieces of information he already knew, but someone from the inside would certainly have knowledge of all the details about the bases and their inner workings, as well as their participants. Yen began to panic when he saw Rigger's calm demeanor. "I'll tell you everything I know. Please, let me live. I did what I could to help the boy." "You think that absolves you?" Kidder growled, his voice low and threatening. "How many lives have you destroyed before you decided it was worth helping one or two?" I had no choice. Yen retorted, his voice trembling. It's the system. Either you work for them, or you get crushed. I was born into this, and I have a family to take care of. Spare me your excuses. Everyone has a choice at some point, Rigger interrupted, his voice firm and authoritative. He leaned in closer to Yen, locking eyes with him. You have two options now, Yen. And pay close attention, because this is your only chance to leave here alive. The prisoner blinked, fear paralyzing his body. You can choose to give us all the information we want and stay alive, Rigger continued. I'll cut off your dominant arm, and you will become a slave to the Iron Legion, serving under its command until I decide it's enough. Keep in mind that it might never be enough. And the other option? Yen asked, his voice barely escaping his dry lips. The other option, Rigger replied coldly, is to tell us everything you know right now, and accept a quick death, courtesy of you having saved the dwarf. Choose. Yen was silent for a moment, his eyes rapidly shifting between Rigger and Kidder. He knew there was nowhere to run. Finally, he lowered his head, defeated. I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, let me live. Rigger stepped back, crossing his arms. We'll see if you're useful, Yen. If you try to deceive me or escape, your punishment will be worse than death. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, I understand. Yen responded desperately, shaking his head. Good, Rigger said. Now, tell us more about the leader of the branch. We want to know everything before we make our move. Yen began providing more detailed information about the organization's bases. After some time, he said something that caught their attention. The leader of the branch I worked for is the brother of the Black Troll, Yen revealed, his voice low, almost as if afraid of being overheard by invisible ears. He knows much more than I do about the organization's operations. I only handle transport and logistics. Rigger leaned in, analyzing every word. The name of the Black Troll was already familiar, but learning that there was a family connection with a subordinate in an important position was valuable information. He turned to Kidder, who listened in silence, his penetrating gaze making it clear that he was absorbing every detail. Kidder, I want you to interrogate him thoroughly about all the organization's bases. Routes, schedules, the number of people involved, their methods. Nothing should be overlooked, Rigger ordered. Kidder nodded firmly. Consider it done. In the meantime, Rigger turned to Yen, draw a map of the branch you worked for. I want to know every detail, the entrances, exits, guard positions, and where your boss is located. Yen swallowed hard but began working. His hand trembled slightly as he drew, but he did his best to create a clear and detailed sketch. Rigger watched his progress for a moment before stepping back. He needed to organize the next steps. After receiving the map, he would make the next move. I'll go there, Rigger declared. I need more complete answers about the organization's strongest members. Yen doesn't know enough about that. Yen looked at him with a mix of fear and relief. The man knew his life was still at risk, but for now, it seemed he had escaped the worst. Before leaving, Rigger went to Taze. He found him training his control over earth magic. Taze, prepare everyone to act before dawn tomorrow, he instructed. Taze frowned. Do we have something planned? I'm working on it. Make sure everyone is ready to leave on my command. Understood, Taze replied, immediately adopting a more serious tone. With that settled, Rigger left the tavern and stepped out into the dark streets of the city. As he walked, his mind began to fill with thoughts. He reflected on his decision to spare Yen. There were many factors involved, but the main one was the impact it would have on Rufus. He had truly liked the little dwarf and knew that if he killed the man who had saved him, it might break the boy's trust. But that wasn't all. He also saw this decision as a test for this world as a whole. Rigger remembered his mother's words, which she always told him, even in the midst of darkness, there would be good people. Words that contrasted with what his father taught him, that anyone who harmed the tribe was an enemy. Verdia, Rigger's master, on the other hand, believed that everything depended on circumstances and perspective. She believed that everyone could change. She considered herself an example of this, saying she had been very different in her youth. He remembered a particular conversation in which she told him about the nobleman who had tried to kill her because her group had killed his parents 50 years ago. I can't blame him for wanting revenge, she had said. But if I could go back in time, I would still spare him. He was just a child back then, and that's my limit for what I could accept. It doesn't matter what reason I had, I took away his family, and he resents me for it. Rigger pondered these words as he walked through the quiet streets. The world was full of conflict. Different perspectives led to inevitable confrontations. His master had told him that decisions were often ambiguous, but as long as you had a moral compass, you could move forward. He agreed with that. How far would he go? What would he be capable of doing to protect his own and achieve his goals? As long as he kept that clear, he believed he could live without regret. There were many nuances between what was right and wrong, and Rigger knew this better than most. Everything depended on perspective. For some, he would probably be considered a villain for killing everyone who opposed him. But for him, things were simple. If you attack someone, you need to be ready to be killed in response. He wasn't foolish enough to think that everyone he had killed was evil by nature. He knew that among them, there were those who didn't want to be there, who had been forced by circumstances or others. However, as his master had once told him, they just ended up on different sides of a battle. He was born into a beast-like race, while these enemies were born human and became mercenaries. The conflict between their species was not new, nor something that could be easily resolved. From the moment they were born, both sides were destined to clash, just as many races in this world were. And this is the world I live in now, Rigger thought as he walked the streets toward the organization's branch. A place where strength dictates what you can or can't do. As long as you're strong enough, you can protect whoever you want, fight against whoever you want, and even kill those who oppose you. In the end, this wasn't his old world. Most of the problems could be easily solved if you were strong enough. This harsh reality was something he accepted, but at the same time, he recognized there were limits. He considered himself a reasonable person, but he still didn't know what his moral limit was. This was the main reason he had spared Yen. A test, not just with Yen, but with this entire world. If Yen was capable of improving and evolving, it would influence Rigger's decision regarding his moral limit. Yen is weak. He poses no threat to me or to others, he reflected. His actions so far show he has some decency, even though he's involved in slave trafficking. Let's keep an eye on him for now. He had entrusted Kidder with the task of keeping Yen under surveillance and extracting everything they could from him. Not just information, but also a deeper understanding of the man they had before them. As he walked through the dark streets, his mind continued to dive into the layers of his own thoughts. He remembered his master's words, "No matter the reason, sometimes you'll end up killing someone who, in other circumstances, could have been a friend. There's no absolute right or wrong, just different points of view. What matters is knowing how far you're willing to go and understanding your own limits. If Yen really changes, it will mean something. If he doesn't change, he'll eventually pay the price," he thought. If Yen knew the weight that his subsequent actions would bring to the world, he would surely have collapsed mentally under the responsibility. Rigger thought, in the meantime, I'll see this brother of the Black Troll. I want more complete answers. It's never too much to be cautious. Finally, he reached his destination, the branch of the organization. The building was discreet, almost invisible among the chaotic architecture of the city. But the signs were there for those who knew what to look for: disguised guards, strange movements, and an air of danger surrounding the place. Rigger stopped for a moment, adjusting his posture and preparing for what lay ahead. He knew he was entering hostile territory, but his strength dispelled any hesitation in his steps. Yan's fate and the actions of everyone involved were yet to be decided. But Rigger had one thing clear in his mind. He would continue following his own path, climbing higher and higher, protecting those he considered dear. With this thought, he advanced into the branch's interior. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Central Continent, Fitoa Region, Buena Village POV, Rudius Grerat. I'm Rudius Grerat. At 6 years old, my life has been, well, very different from what I imagined it would be. After reincarnating into a new world when I died being run over by a truck, I decided I would take this new chance seriously. After all, I didn't do too well in my past life, being a NET at 34 years old. My parents in this world are Zenith and Paul, and we have a maid named Lilia. When I learned how to read, I set out to learn magic, something that every reincarnated person would want, and I ended up having some talent for it. Thanks to that, I got the best teacher I could ask for, Roxy McGurdia. Her sacred treasure was still there, hidden in a chest in my room, which was comforting. Well, thanks to her, I became a water saint at 5 years old. It seemed like a big deal from her reaction, but I can't get arrogant. After all, I had the advantage of being reincarnated. My talent might just be slightly better than others. She also helped me heal my trauma, and now I can leave home without fear, which really meant a lot to me. Little by little, I'm adapting. And I made a friend, Sylphie, who's a girl from our village. She has green hair and a sweet, but also very courageous, personality. She's really cute, and since I started teaching her magic, our friendship has grown quickly. Recently, something big happened. My mom, Zenith, revealed that she was pregnant again. I was happy to know I'd have a little brother or sister. Sylphie and I continue our training and play. With her around, things seem easier. Life is still unpredictable, but I know I can count on her. Now, with my mom pregnant and a promising future ahead, I feel like I have something important to protect. What will the future hold for us? A month later, a new problem emerged. The maid Lilia was found to be pregnant, and the father was Paul. The dawn was silent. Rigger moved like a predator among the shadows, his footsteps leaving no trace. He had memorized the locations on the map drawn by Yen, following the least guarded path to infiltrate the branch. The city still slept, and darkness was his greatest ally, his heightened senses alerting him to any nearby presence. Observing the main building of the branch, Rigger noticed 2 guards stationed at the front entrance. They spoke in hushed tones, but he didn't bother trying to listen. Confronting them directly would alert the others. He scanned the structure until his gaze landed on a partially open window on the upper floor. With a swift leap, he used wind magic to propel himself upward, gripping the windowsill with precision. Pulling himself up silently, he slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, carrying the faint smell of mildew and candle smoke. Rigger landed lightly on the floor. He glided down the narrow hallway, guided by the faint glow of light at the corridor's end. Upon reaching the room marked as the chief's office, he paused and listened. The sound of a pen scratching against paper and steady breathing confirmed the presence of someone inside. Rigger approached carefully, as silent as a wolf. Inside, a demon-like man sat at a desk, engrossed in his writings. The figure's skin was dark gray, nearly black, with 2 short horns curving back from his forehead. The flickering candlelight partially illuminated his face, revealing a focused expression and narrow eyes. He was so absorbed in his task that he didn't notice the blue blade of Rigger's sword pressed against his throat. "If you resist, you die," Rigger murmured, his voice firm and as sharp as his blade. "If you call for help, you die. If you fail to answer any question I ask, you die. Understood." The man swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the glowing blue sword reflecting in the candlelight. "Why yes," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Rigger studied him for a moment before continuing. "What is the strength of your brother, the Black Troll, and who are the strongest in this organization besides him?" The man hesitated but, feeling the increased pressure of the blade, began speaking quickly. "My brother, he's strong. Very strong. He recently defeated a North Saint who joined us. It was a tough fight, but he won. I'd say he's on that level." Rigger narrowed his eyes. It was what he expected regarding the Black Troll's strength, but this North Saint was new information. "And the others?" the man continued. "Our organization has about 50 advanced-level warriors spread throughout the city, with more than half stationed at the main base. But most of them aren't loyal. They're here for the money, nothing else. Still, they're experienced and well-trained." "Tell me more about this North Saint," Rigger commanded. The man exhaled shakily, trying to steady his nerves. "His name is Gallus Cleaner. He arrived recently with a proposal. He suggested we launch an operation to capture a large number of beast slaves. He learned about our recent failure and brought news that the sacred beast was born a few years ago. He believes that if we don't act quickly, a new military force among the beast races, called the Iron Legion, will make future attacks much more difficult." Hearing this, Rigger's eyes narrowed. The Iron Legion is already becoming a problem for them. That's good, but it also means we need to act quickly. "What special abilities does your race have?" Rigger asked. "We possess significant physical strength," the man replied, "but nothing beyond that. We have no unique magic or anything like that." Rigger remained silent for a moment, weighing the man's words. He didn't sense any lies, but caution was always warranted. "Where are the organization's records?" The man swallowed hard again and pointed to a cabinet in the corner of the room. Over there. All the names, routes, and operations of this branch are in that cabinet. Without lowering his guard, Rigger extended a hand, summoning a light gust of wind that opened the cabinet door. As it swung open, a trap was triggered, a hidden arrow shot out, narrowly missing them. The sudden movement surprised Rigger for a fraction of a second, but his reflexes quickly kicked in. That brief distraction was enough for the demon-like man to make his move. He drew a short sword hidden beneath the desk and lunged toward Rigger's heart. But before the blade could even come close, the man's world flipped, literally. In a single fluid motion, Rigger sidestepped the attack and decapitated the man with one precise strike. His sword cut through the air with lethal efficiency. The demon's head rolled across the desk, his eyes wide in a mix of shock and despair. His body collapsed a moment later, knocking over the candle and plunging the room into semi-darkness. "You resisted," Rigger muttered, cleaning his blade on a cloth from the desk. He turned his attention to the cabinet and the scattered papers. At least the documents were indeed here. Wasting no time, Rigger began scanning the records. Once he confirmed the information matched what the man had said, he set the papers aside. Rigger stood silently for a moment, staring at the decapitated body before moving. If those guards check on their chief periodically, I need to ensure no one gets in. With a subtle motion, he conjured a compact, reinforced earthen wall over the doorway. The barrier fit snugly into the frame, completely blocking access. It wasn't an elegant solution, but he wouldn't take long to return to this place anyway. He moved toward the window he'd entered through. Using his mana-enhanced vision, he scanned the branch. The flow of energy through the walls revealed several guards patrolling the area, along with a group of slaves confined to a larger room in the back. He also detected two particularly strong mana sources, confirming the presence of the advanced-level warriors the demon had mentioned. 2 advanced warriors. Teis can handle them if necessary. If I attack now and someone escapes, the main base will be alerted, complicating matters. He resolved to stick to the plan. This branch would be an easy target once everything was ready. Until then, no one could suspect a thing. Moving with the same precision as before, Rigger slipped out through the window and vanished into the early morning shadows. 2 saints and several advanced warriors. I've never faced anything that strong. But I'm confident I can win, as long as I don't make any mistakes. With his objective clear, he headed back toward the city, moving quickly through the empty streets until he reached the inn where Paikak, the innkeeper, resided. The building's shabby exterior exuded the same decrepit aura as the man himself. He entered without hesitation, finding Paikak snoring loudly in a corner of the main hall. With a sharp bang on the nearby table, Rigger startled the old man awake. Who dares disturb me at this hour?" Paikak grumbled, blinking furiously as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. When his eyes landed on Rigger, his face twisted in alarm. "Oh, it's you. What do you want in the middle of the night, beast boy?" "I need you to prepare supplies, wagons, and horses for a convoy," Rigger said bluntly, his voice firm and non-negotiable. "Everything must be ready by late tomorrow afternoon." Paikak's eyes widened in surprise. "A convoy? What convoy? Who are you planning to transport? And if you want this by tomorrow, it'll cost you a fortune, boy. It's not easy to get all that on such short notice." Rigger leaned forward, a cold smile spreading across his lips. "I'll soon have plenty of travelers for you. I'll give you the exact number in a few hours. As for the money, it will come with them. Just start the preparations immediately." Paikak hesitated, looking at Rigger with a mix of fear and irritation. "You think it's that simple? I need to know more details." "You'll know enough when the time comes," Rigger cut off any attempt at an argument. "I know you sold our information to someone, so consider this payback." The merchant swallowed hard, mumbling something unintelligible as he began to rise, but Rigger didn't wait to hear more. He disappeared into the darkness before Paikak could lodge further complaints. When he reached the inn, the sky was beginning to take on a faintly lighter hue, signaling the approaching dawn. Rigger entered the inn without ceremony. The group was scattered across various rooms, taking advantage of the brief respite before their next move. He knocked on Tei's door, and the warrior, ever alert, opened it almost instantly. "Gather everyone in one room now," he ordered curtly. Teis nodded without question and left to carry out the task. Rigger remained there, waiting as the others were summoned. Within minutes, the small room was crowded. Teis, Kidder, Idar, Rufus, the slave Yen, and the other warriors stood ready, either sitting or leaning against the walls. Rigger stood at the center, his piercing gaze sweeping over them, feeling the gravity of the moment. The Iron Legion, even in its nascent stage, had already proven itself a promising force. This would be its first real operation outside the Great Forest. "Listen carefully," Rigger began, his voice as sharp as a blade. "As Teis should have informed you, we act today before sunrise. The operation will be swift and precise, like lightning striking before anyone realizes it's there." He paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. "Kidder and Teis will each lead 13 warriors. We will strike the slavers' bases simultaneously, starting with the largest and working our way down to the smallest. The goal is to eliminate as much resistance as possible before they have a chance to react or flee." The two warriors nodded, absorbing the instructions. Rigger continued. "Idar," he called out, and the young human immediately straightened. "You and 2 other warriors will follow me to the main base. Your job is to eliminate anyone trying to escape and ensure nothing goes wrong while I deal with the organization's leaders." Idar nodded, his expression serious. "Once I'm done with the main base, I'll assist the rest of you with the other bases. Kill anyone who resists or attempts to flee. If some escape, it doesn't matter." He smirked slightly. "In fact, it's those fugitives who will spread the news of what happened." The warrior's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Rufus, the young dwarf they had rescued, sat in a corner, listening intently. Rigger turned his attention to him. "Rufus," he called, and the boy immediately sat up straighter. "You'll go with Idar. Follow his orders and observe. Learn as much as you can." Rufus nodded vigorously, masking his anxiety with determination. Rigger then addressed Yen, standing near Kidder with a cautious expression. "And you," Rigger began, his voice as unyielding as stone, "will accompany me to the main base." Yan's face turned pale, but he dared not object. Rigger stepped closer to him, stopping mere inches away. In one swift motion, his sword ignited into a blazing blade, slicing off Yan's left arm. The wound was instantly cauterized by the heat of the magic, but the man screamed in agony, collapsing to his knees. "What you do from now on will determine your future," Rigger declared, his gaze piercing. Rufus looked at the man with a hint of pity. The room fell silent except for Yan's labored breathing. Rigger turned back to the group, his harsh demeanor softening slightly as he surveyed their determined faces. "This is the Iron Legion's first step beyond the Great Forest," he said, his voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "Each of you will be a part of this. What we do today, I hope, will be remembered as the beginning of something greater." The warriors nodded, their eyes alight with renewed resolve. Rigger stepped back, satisfied with their energy. "Be swift, be lethal," he continued. "As for the slaves, offer them 2 choices, regardless of their race: return to their homes or join the Iron Legion. Don't force anyone, but make it clear they owe us a debt." He raised his voice. "Questions?" A chorus of voices replied, "No, Chief." Rigger smirked, pleased by their spirit. "Then we're ready. We strike before the first light of dawn. Show the world who we are. Show them what we're capable of." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving the group in a fervent silence. The Iron Legion was about to take its first major step, and Rigger was certain it would be one the world would never forget. The moon was still high when the warriors gathered on the roof of the Black Sails Inn. The sun was beginning to hint at its arrival as the group stared at Rigger in complete silence. "Kidder and Teis, listen carefully," his voice was firm but low, so as not to break the silence of the night. "If anything goes wrong, retreat. This is a mission of extermination and rescue, not a mission for you to throw your lives away. If you think you can't retreat, shout my name as loud as possible. Don't hesitate. I will come to help, no matter where you are in the city." The 2 leaders nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. Without further ceremony, Rigger raised his hand and signaled for them to disperse. Like shadows, each group moved in a different direction, leaving only the wind as their company. Rigger led his group toward one of the city's gates. Their main base was located a few hundred meters outside the city. He ran ahead with Yen close behind, Idar carrying Rufus on his back, and the 2 additional warriors completing the rest of the group. The tension in the air was palpable, and even their careful steps seemed to echo loudly in the dark of the night. As they advanced, Rigger instructed his group, "Yen, you'll enter through the main entrance and kill everyone you can, using the fact that they recognize you as an ally." The man nodded seriously, with a hint of fear, adjusting the sword at his waist with his remaining arm. Rigger then looked at Rufus, his gaze firm. "Rufus, your position is behind Idar. Always. Watch everything Idar does. I plan to start your training right after this operation." "Understood, boss," Rufus replied, trying to appear serious, which only made him seem more adorable. They exited the city by jumping over the small wall, without alerting the guards, and continued running through the forest. Rigger could already hear various voices and smell the scent of many people in the distance. After running along a small trail, they finally saw, ahead of them, the target of their mission, a massive complex surrounded by high walls. In the center stood a main building that seemed sturdy and imposing, with a faint glow from the torches still burning around it. His sharp senses made Rigger hear muffled laughter and the sound of music coming from inside. "A party!" One of the beast warriors murmured in surprise. "Looks like it," Rigger replied, narrowing his eyes. He activated his magic eye. The field of vision around him changed drastically, allowing him to see the mana of the people beyond the walls. Inside the main hall, a large group of men were gathered, their movements carefree, with mugs and weapons within reach. His eyes scanned the underground area, where something very different caught his attention. An extensive subterranean space, lined with cages packed with people. Fatigued faces, thin bodies, and eyes full of despair. Slaves. Many slaves. "A hell hidden beneath the earth," he muttered to himself, his jaw tight. Deactivating his magic eye, he turned back to the group. "I'll infiltrate. I'll eliminate as many as possible from the side I enter, fast and silent. Only after will I head to the main hall. With all the commotion, many of them will probably head to the main hall to help, but some may choose to flee." He pointed toward the visible entrances. "Stay alert to the entrances. Kill anyone you see, unless it's a slave fleeing. Once they realize what's going on, many will try to escape, likely through some secret exits, but as I said, we don't need to kill them all." They all nodded, their expressions rigid and tense. Rigger gave them one last look before disappearing into the darkness, like a shadow gliding along the walls of the complex. He ran toward the side where he had noticed the highest concentration of people earlier. The eastern wall rose before him, tall but unprotected. He adjusted his stance and propelled himself with an agile leap, using wind magic to soften the impact as he landed on the other side. His boots touched the ground lightly, but not enough to avoid the attention of two guards patrolling nearby. The men immediately turned, but Rigger was already in motion. His blue sword gleamed in a clean arc, the brilliance of the longsword of light briefly appearing in the darkness. The strike was so fast the guards had no time to react. He passed swiftly between them, aiming for their throats. Both collapsed to the ground, blood spurting from their necks, their bodies motionless in an instant. Rigger quickly wiped the blade, the tension in his muscles evident. He looked toward the complex ahead, activating his magic eye again. The mana presences glowed like flames in the dark, revealing the positions of several people, some patrolling, others sleeping or scattered in corridors. The largest concentration was still in the central hall, celebrating. He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. Most are in that hall, but many are still patrolling or resting in their rooms. I can't afford to explore every room, and destroying everything at once would alert the main hall. His eyes lit up as he came up with an idea. Maybe it's time to test that technique. He extended his index finger, and a small wind sphere began to spin at its tip. After many failed attempts to create a vacuum magic, he realized it wasn't something he could achieve quickly, as the control needed for it was immense. Rigger then simplified the idea, a wind compression, dense and deadly. He called it the supersonic bullet. Its greatest advantage was that it was a very silent technique, and when released, it cut through the air with impressive speed. It could easily penetrate these wooden walls. Although his control was still imprecise, the technique was effective for taking down distant targets. He was confident he could hit enemies up to 40 meters away with enough accuracy. Rigger stepped forward, moving like a shadow between the walls. He identified two guards stationed behind a side door. Raising his finger, he aimed and fired the supersonic bullet. The small sphere cut through the air like an invisible lightning bolt, passing through the wall and leaving a small hole as it struck the first guard's neck, dropping him with a thud. The second guard barely had time to comprehend what had happened before being hit directly in the temple. He collapsed to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Seems functional. Moving through the complex's outer corridors, Rigger slipped by with agility. His magic vision guided him, allowing him to anticipate the guards' positions. Around a corner, he saw two men talking in low voices. Without hesitation, Rigger prepared and leaped toward them, his sword already ready. As the guard turned the corner, the blue blade described an arc so fast it seemed invisible. The strike split the man's neck, and he fell with a muffled sound. The second guard turned in alarm at hearing the body fall, but before he could react, a supersonic bullet shot through his forehead. Rigger continued forward, his steps becoming increasingly precise. As he advanced through the eastern complex, he occasionally encountered more guards, patrolling or napping in dimly lit corners. He eliminated them without hesitation. Each swing of his sword was clean and calculated, with no wasted motion. He encountered a few slaves on the way and only knocked them out so they wouldn't draw attention. At one point, he saw 3 guards in a narrow corridor, separated by 2 walls. Rigger prepared 3 supersonic bullets simultaneously, firing them in quick succession, hitting each target with surgical precision. The subtle sound of the impacts was almost inaudible, and the bodies fell without knowing what had hit them. As he advanced, Rigger felt the heat of adrenaline mixed with the coldness of strategic thinking. If I'm careless, someone might escape and alert the main hall. Eventually, he exited the eastern complex and reached the entrance of the central building. This area was more heavily guarded, with 4 men positioned near the reinforced wooden doors, looking strong and unwilling to risk surviving a wind bullet. Rigger took a deep breath and adjusted his grip on the sword. He leaped forward in a fluid motion, the blue sword cutting through the air. They all appeared to be strong warriors, reacting quickly to the attack, but his flash step gave him the speed advantage needed to prevent them from yelling. He swiftly took down 3 of them with the longsword of light. The 4th guard, however, was more prepared. He quickly stepped back, reaching for a small alarm bell attached to the wall. Rigger noticed that the man would reach the bell even while dying, and at the last moment, he decided to sever the man's hand. His blade struck with precision, but the guard managed to partially pull his arm back, losing only a few fingers. Reeling from the pain, the man reached for his sword and began to scream for reinforcements, but Rigger was quicker. In an explosive motion, he plunged a hidden dagger from his sleeve straight into the man's windpipe. Almost. Rigger murmured, silently thanking himself for bringing backup weapons as he sheathed the dagger. With the entrance secured, he opened the doors and infiltrated the central structure. The interior was a maze of narrow corridors, dimly lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Rigger activated his magical eye once more, detecting the mana presences in the nearby rooms. He advanced silently, eliminating anyone in his path. Some guards fell to his blade, others to his supersonic bullet, depending on the circumstances. As he moved deeper, the sound of laughter and music grew louder, and the air became thick with a mingling sense of sweat, beer, and food. The banquet hall is close. Rigger crept down one final hallway, his steps as light as the wind. The sounds of voices and celebratory cheers became sharper, clearer. He could hear mugs clinking against each other, followed by raucous laughter and shouts of camaraderie. Through his magical eye, the scene ahead came into focus. The hall was packed, with dozens of figures seated at 3 long tables. Each mana presence shimmered intensely, indicating advanced levels of strength. These were seasoned warriors, veterans of countless battles. What truly caught Rigger's attention, however, was the dominant presence at the center of the hall. The sheer intensity of its mana dwarfed the others, radiating a powerful and oppressive aura. The source was a towering figure, whose laughter boomed above the din, filled with an overwhelming sense of confidence. That's my target. If I take him out first, the rest will fall easily. As Rigger moved closer, the lively revelry only grew louder. He could feel the heat from the torches in the suffocating air and the pervasive smell of spilled beer, greasy meat, and unwashed bodies. But something below diverted his focus. Using his magical eye, he looked down and saw hundreds of cramped cages beneath the main hall, filled with slaves. The stark contrast between the opulence above and the suffering below filled him with grim determination. The wooden floor muffled most of the noise from the banquet hall, but the slaves could still hear faint echoes of their captors' celebration. They'll wish they were down there soon enough. Turning the last corner before the banquet hall's entrance, Rigger began channeling his magic. His blue sword glowed, not only with light but also with fierce orange flames licking along its blade, fueled by his mana. The heat was intense, and the flames danced violently, their light casting ominous reflections on the walls. 2 guards stood at the doorway, reacting instantly upon seeing him. But Rigger was faster. In a fluid motion, he surged forward, his blade slicing through the air in a low arc, severing both guards' necks with surgical precision. Blood spiraled through the air as their bodies crumpled to the ground. The door was open. Some of the hall's occupants noticed him immediately, their heads snapping toward the entrance as they began to shout warnings. But Rigger had already locked onto his target, the massive figure at the center of the room. The Black Troll. Seated in a colossal chair, he was a monstrous figure with dark gray skin, bulging muscles that strained against his black armor, and 2 curved horns jutting from his head. His menacing presence was undeniable, and his aura was suffocating. Rigger took a deep breath and released a roar. But this wasn't just any roar, it was his howling magic in its most powerful form, a skill he had refined meticulously to create an effect akin to the Conqueror's haki. Using his basic knowledge of acoustics and wave physics, he had perfected the technique. The shockwave spread like an invisible explosion, sweeping through the hall and sending dishes, cups, and utensils flying. The music stopped abruptly. Laughter turned into stunned silence. The echoes of his magic were like distant thunder reverberating through the space. Many of the weaker individuals collapsed unconscious on the spot. The stronger ones staggered, disoriented, struggling to regain their footing. Even the servants and slaves present at the banquet fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the residual force. Rigger didn't stop there. He activated the pinnacle of his speed techniques, Burst Step, a combination of explosive fire and wind magic. Flames erupted beneath his feet, propelling him forward with a velocity that shattered the limits of human perception. His impulse was accompanied by a muffled burst, propelling him with even greater speed than his traditional flash step. The force of his movement bent the air around him, creating a concussive blast as he broke the sound barrier. The floor splintered under the sheer pressure of his acceleration, leaving cracks and debris in his wake. His target was clear, the Black Troll neck. As Rigger closed the distance, he activated his fastest technique, Longsword of Light. The blue blade intensified, the flames turning an otherworldly shade of blue tinged with purple, glowing like a star about to explode. The light streaked toward the Black Troll throat with unerring precision, aiming to sever his head in a single decisive strike. The blade struck. But at the last moment, an unexpected force intervened. A radiant black energy enveloped the Black Troll neck, forming an ethereal shield. Rigger's blade bit into the defense, carving a 2-centimeter deep gash into the creature's flesh, but it wasn't enough. Damn it! Rigger cursed internally, retreating just as a sword arced through the space he had occupied moments earlier. The delayed shockwave of Rigger's burst finally reached the hall, scattering tables and chairs and knocking weaker individuals to the ground. He looked at the one who had thrown the sword, a burly man of medium height, with a slightly disheveled appearance. His hair was thin and brown, his eyes small and calculating, with a smile on his face. This must be Gallus Cleaner. The Black Troll rose slowly from his chair, his hulking form casting a long shadow over the chaos. The chair groaned under his weight before toppling backward. He touched his bleeding neck, his fingers coming away coated in dark crimson. His lips twisted into a sadistic grin. "You're dead, boy," he growled, his voice a deep rumble that carried the weight of his towering presence. The failed ambush had set the stage for the true battle.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.